She had survived 5 years inside a world built on blood and silence. She had learned to pour tea without trembling, to smile at people who despised her, to sleep beside a man whose empire was built on things she was never supposed to know. But nothing, not one single moment in 5 years of being Joon-Ho Baek's wife, prepared Amara Ellis for the night she walked into that dining hall and found her own wedding ring lying cold on the table next to divorce papers signed in her husband's hand. They told her he was 10,000 feet in the air, somewhere over the Pacific. They were wrong. If this story already has its hooks in you, you are exactly who this channel was made for. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications because we drop stories like this every single week. Stories about betrayal, loyalty, power, and the quiet people who outlast all three. Before you go any further, drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because part 1 starts right now. And you do not want to miss what comes next. PA. The convoy left at 6 in the morning, and Amara watched it go. 7 black vehicles moving through the iron gates of the Baek estate in that particular formation. The kind of precision that made ordinary people step back on sidewalks and look at their shoes. The kind of formation that said, do not ask questions, do not make eye contact, do not exist too loudly in the vicinity of this. She stood at the second-floor window with a cup of coffee going cold in her hand, and she counted the vehicles without letting herself know she was counting. A habit she'd picked up somewhere in the middle of year 2. The counting, the tracking. The small, quiet way of keeping account of what was moving and where and how fast. Because in the bakehouse, the things that didn't get counted were the things that eventually blindsided you. The last vehicle disappeared around the curve of the private road. The gates sealed shut with that low hydraulic groan she'd learned to associate with absence. Not loss. She was careful about that distinction. Just absence. The particular texture of a house from which the primary occupant had departed. She turned away from the window before she let herself feel anything about it. That was something 5 years had taught her. You didn't stand at windows too long. You didn't let the staff see you count the minutes. You kept your posture straight and your expression something close to neutral, and you moved through this house like a woman who belonged in it, because the moment you showed uncertainty, the moment your shoulders dropped even a fraction, they smelled it. Every single one of them. She changed into work clothes, gray linen, flat shoes. Nothing that announced itself. She walked down to the east wing, where she kept her drafting table and her architectural models. And she sat down and she put her hands on the plans for the cultural center she'd been commissioned to design, and she let the work be what it always was. Proof that she existed before any of this, that she had a mind of her own and a name that didn't belong to anyone else. She had been at the table less than 40 minutes when the knock came. Not a polite knock, not the knock of a person asking permission. The kind of knock that announces itself as a disruption before the hand has even made full contact with the wood. A knock that says, I am already inside this conversation, whether you let me in or not. She knew who it was before the door opened. Madame Sun-hee never waited for answers. She had, in Amara's experience, never waited for anything she hadn't already decided to receive. The woman entered in a silk house robe, the color of deep jade. Her silver hair swept up with the kind of effortless arrangement that took a significant portion of a morning to construct. 71 years old, and she moved through doorways the way certain people move, as if the architecture had been built specifically around the fact of her. She looked at Amara's drafting table the way people look at a stain on otherwise clean fabric. We are eating early today. Not an invitation, not even an announcement, really. A declaration, the way weather is declared. Family lunch, 1 o'clock. Amara set down her pencil. Thank you. I'll be there. Madame Sun-hee's eyes moved across the table. The spread drawings, the pencil shavings, the coffee ring on the corner of the drafting paper. She didn't say a word about any of it. She didn't need to. The look itself was a complete sentence, subject and predicate and punctuation all at once. She left without closing the door. Amara listened to the footsteps recede down the corridor. Then she picked up her pencil. Her hand was completely steady. She had spent a long time training it to be. The lunch was what all family meals were when Joon-Ho was traveling. The table was set with the best porcelain. The food was excellent. Madame Sun-hee permitted nothing less in her kitchen, and the warmth was precisely as present as it always was, which was to say, it was not present at all. Excellence and warmth were two entirely different qualities, and anyone who had sat at this table more than once understood the distinction without needing it explained. Kyung-tae arrived last, sliding into his chair with the comfortable slowness of a man who had never once in his adult life been made to feel late. 44 years old, broad across the shoulders, with heavy hands and a laugh that arrived before anything funny had actually happened. Joon-ho's first cousin, senior enough in the organization to carry real authority, comfortable enough in that authority to wear it like a coat he never intended to take off, even indoors, even at the table, even in the presence of people who outranked him. He looked at Amara across the table and smiled. "You look tired," he said. The Korean was slow and deliberate, designed to be understood by someone whose first language wasn't Korean, which he never let her forget. It wasn't. "Didn't sleep well without him." She poured herself water. "I slept fine, thank you." "Maybe the house feels different." He picked up his chopsticks with the ease of a man entirely unconcerned with how the next thing lands. "Bigger. When there's just you." She didn't answer that one. She reached for the soup instead. She had learned that certain things, if not fed, eventually ran out of energy and collapsed back into whatever they'd come from. Kyung-tae's observations were not, in her experience, that kind of thing, but the alternative, engaging, had a cost she wasn't willing to pay today. Joon-ho's younger sister Soo-jin sat across from Amara with the practiced boredom of a woman who had decided, sometime in her early 20s, that discomfort was an emotion that happened to other people. 36, dressed in something expensive that managed to look casual, watching Amara pick up her soup spoon with the mild attention of someone watching a minor inconvenience resolve itself. Then she said, in English, very clearly, the English of a person who speaks it fluently and chooses it in this moment specifically because of who else is at the table. "Did they not have this kind of food where you grew up?" It landed exactly the way it was meant to, clean, deniable, if someone challenged it, specifically designed to place Amara outside the perimeter of the table, of the room, of the house, of the country, in a single sentence. A servant near the wall looked at the floor. Another shifted half a step toward the door. Amara took a sip of soup, set the spoon down, picked up a napkin and touched the corner of her mouth, very unhurried, the way you might take your time with something when the thing you're actually managing is the temperature of what's happening under your sternum. Then she answered in Korean, quiet and precise. "The food is excellent. You have a wonderful kitchen staff." Soo-jin's eyes narrowed slightly. That wasn't what she'd wanted back. Madame Sun-hee, at the head of the table, said nothing. She lifted her teacup and watched Amara over the rim with the calm patience of a woman running a very long experiment and finding the results confirmatory. The meal lasted 45 minutes. By the time Amara excused herself and walked back upstairs, the accumulated weight of every comment and every loaded silence and every deliberate small cruelty was pressing against the inside of her chest like fingers finding a bruise. She kept her back straight all the way up the staircase. She kept it straight all the way to the bedroom door. She closed the door behind her, sat on the edge of the bed, pressed both palms flat against her thighs, and breathed through her nose until the pressure behind her eyes subsided enough to function. She didn't cry. She had made a decision somewhere in the second year to not cry in this house. Not because grief wasn't real, because she had understood, with the specific clarity that comes from watching a household's information flow, that tears here were not private. Someone always noticed. Someone always mentioned it to someone else. And by the time it traveled from a servant to Madame Sun-hee, and from Madame Sun-hee to whoever she chose to pass it to, it would have already transformed into something else entirely. Evidence that Amara was unstable, unsuitable, a liability to a man who could not afford liabilities. She wouldn't hand them that. So she sat on the edge of the bed and breathed, and after a few minutes she got up and went back to the drafting table and worked until the light through the east wing windows turned from gold to gray to nothing. The second day was worse. Madame Sun-hee hosted a small gathering in the afternoon. 3 wives of senior business associates, the kind of women who moved in the same overlapping orbits of wealth and social positioning and unspoken alliances, who communicated through register and implication and the specific language of women who have spent decades managing surfaces. Amara was not told about the gathering. She discovered it by accident, coming downstairs for a glass of water, hearing the laughter floating out from the reception room. She stopped in the corridor. Through the half-open door, she could see the arrangement. The chairs, the trays, Madame Sun-hee positioned at the center of the group with the ease of a woman in her natural element. Then she heard her own name. Her full name, Amara Ellis Beck, said in a particular tone. Then a pause. Then laughter. The soft, melodic kind that women deploy when something has been said that cannot be unsaid in the presence of strangers. Amara turned around. She went back upstairs. The glass of water could wait. What she didn't see, because she'd turned too soon, was the face of one of the visiting women, Mrs. Choi, whose husband had known Joon-Ho since their university years. Mrs. Choi had not laughed. She had set her teacup down very carefully and looked at Madame Sun-hee with an expression that wasn't disapproval and wasn't quite pity, but lived somewhere in the uncomfortable space between them. She said nothing. She was not the kind of woman who said things in rooms where the saying would cost her, but she filed it, and she remembered. The third day, Kyung-tae crossed a line. It happened in the East Wing corridor in the early afternoon, the house quiet the way it got quiet. When the staff was occupied elsewhere, and the grounds crew was in the outer garden, and for 20 minutes or so the interior of the estate had the specific hush of a large space holding its breath. Amara was carrying a roll of architectural drawings back from a meeting with one of the household assistants, a young man named Ji Young, who'd been helping her source materials, one of the few people in this house who treated her like a person rather than a problem. She was thinking about load-bearing columns. She was thinking about the cultural center's eastern courtyard. She was not thinking about Kyung-tae. He stepped out of a side room as she passed. She had the immediate animal sense that it wasn't accidental. He fell into step beside her without being invited, and he was in one of those good moods, the energized, restless kind, the kind that made Amara's instincts quietly recalibrate without her consciously deciding to recalibrate them. "You know," he said, conversational, "I used to think he brought you here to make some kind of statement. You know how Joon-Ho is. Always doing something unexpected, keeps people off balance." A pause. "But the longer you're here, the more I think he just didn't think it all the way through." She kept walking. "I need to get these to my table." "The women in this family's history," he continued, like she hadn't said anything, "they carried things, bloodlines, alliances, connections that meant something in this world, that cost something, that opened specific doors." He let that sit for a moment. "What does your bloodline connect us to exactly?" She stopped walking. There was a specific thing that happened in her body when something was genuinely bad enough. Not fear, exactly. Not anger at first. Something colder and more total than either. A stillness that came over her whole system, the way a circuit breaker trips when the load becomes too much. Except instead of going dark, everything became very precise and very clear. She turned around and looked at Kyung-tae directly. She did this because she had learned that with men like him, continuing to move read as retreat, and retreat was always an invitation. "I'm going to be kind," she said, her voice level and careful, "and assume that you don't fully understand how that question sounds. For your sake, I hope that's true." She walked away before he could answer. Her hands were shaking slightly by the time she reached the East Wing. Not from fear, from something harder than fear. The particular fury of a woman who has been careful in rooms where she shouldn't have needed to be careful, more times than she can count, for years, and is running low on the particular resource that carefulness requires. She put the drawings down on the drafting table and smoothed them flat and held the edges and looked at her lines. The load-bearing walls, the open spaces, the entrance designed to welcome people instead of sort them. And she let herself feel it for exactly 30 seconds. 30 seconds of pure, clean, unmanaged rage. Then she picked up her pencil. She thought about calling Joon-Ho. She actually picked up her phone and looked at his number. She had 3 ways to reach him, one of which bypassed every layer of staff and security and rang directly to his personal device. She had never used it for something like this. He was in meetings, managing things she didn't have full visibility on. His world was complicated and dangerous in ways that made what was happening in this house feel like a different category of problem entirely. But that was always what she told herself. That was the argument she made every time. She put the phone face down on the table. She went back to work. That evening, as she did every evening when he was traveling, she went to Joon-Ho's private office. It had started in the first year. She'd discovered that he worked so late and so intently that he forgot the basics. Water, his plants, the photographs on his desk. She'd started tending to those things without announcing it, without making it into something symbolic. It was just what she did. She watered the 2 small plants on the windowsill. She straightened the photographs. She checked the secure tablet he'd left for her, reading his latest check-in from overseas. Brief, as always, functional, but at the end a single line. "I'll be home by the end of the week. Stay steady." She sat in his chair for a moment. Not to feel powerful. The chair didn't do that for her. She sat in it to feel close to something she was afraid of losing without being able to name exactly what or exactly why. Then she turned off the lamp. She whispered to the empty room, barely above a breath, "Come home safe." Then she went upstairs. Behind the wall, behind the reinforced security corridor that ran parallel to the office's north wall, behind the surveillance panel monitoring 47 separate camera feeds, a man stood in the dark and did not move. He had been standing there for 11 minutes. He had watched her water the plants. He had watched her straighten the photographs. He had watched her sit in his chair with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the window. He had heard what she whispered. Joon-Ho back had not made a sound. His convoy had turned around 4 hours after leaving Seoul. His intelligence chief, a methodical, almost constitutionally humorless man named Director Yoon, who had been with the organization for 19 years and who communicated, as a matter of professional principle, only in facts, had intercepted a pattern of encrypted financial transfers that fit no approved operation. Internal transfers, moving through shell structures that only senior family members had access to, accelerating over the weeks leading up to Joon-Ho's scheduled departure in a pattern that, when laid out sequentially, was not ambiguous. He had come back through the estate's eastern underground entrance, a route that appeared on no official floor plan, that connected through the original construction tunnels to a secure anteroom beneath the East Garden. Yoon had briefed him there. The financial picture was still assembling itself, but even partial, it was enough, more than enough. He had intended to use the surveillance feeds for evidence connected specifically to the financial crime. He had intended to stay invisible until the picture was complete. He had not intended to discover what he had discovered instead. He had watched 47 cameras cycle their feeds for hours. He had watched his mother's gathering of women, the performance of it, the way hospitality became a weapon in her hands when she chose to deploy it that way. He had watched Kyung-tae step out of the side room and follow Amara down the east corridor. He had watched Soo-jin at the lunch table, the English sentence delivered with that specific clean precision, the smile that lived on her face while she delivered it. He had watched Amara. He had watched her absorb every single thing, every insult, every exclusion, every small and deliberate cruelty dressed up as something else. And he had watched her walk back to her drafting table every time, pick up her pencil every time, keep working every single time. She had made no calls to complain. She had summoned no one. She had confronted no one directly except Kyung-tae in the corridor, and even then her response had been so controlled, so precise, so stripped of anything they could use against her that it barely registered as a confrontation at all. She had just continued, back straight, hands steady, face composed into something that looked like calm but was actually something much harder than calm. It was the thing that lives on the other side of calm, after calm has cost you everything it can cost. He stood in the dark and watched his wife hold herself together inside a house he had made unsafe for her, and for the first time in a long time, Joon-Ho back felt something he did not have an easy name for. It wasn't anger. He knew anger well. Anger was loud and directional, and in his world, useful. This was quieter, more corrosive. The specific feeling of a man understanding all at once what his willful blindness has been doing to someone who didn't deserve to absorb the cost of it. He stayed in the corridor through the evening. He watched Amara come to his office. He heard what she said to the empty room. After she left, he stood in the dark a long time. Then Director Yoon appeared at his shoulder, silent as always, and set a tablet in front of him. New financial data. Another layer of the embezzlement structure unraveled. Names were becoming visible. Amounts were becoming staggering. "There's more," Yoon said quietly. "The document trail is deeper than we thought." A pause that, from Yoon, was the equivalent of a full stop. "There are legal preparations. Some of them involve your wife's name." Joon-Ho turned and looked at him. Yoon held the tablet steady. His face did what it always did. Nothing. "Someone in this house has been building a case. A false one. Designed to surface if authorities ever came looking at the syndicate's finances. It places the origin of the embezzlement with her." The corridor was completely silent. Joon-Ho took the tablet. He looked at the documents. The forged signatures, the fabricated transaction records, the carefully constructed trail that led away from the people who built it and directly toward the woman who knew nothing, not one thing, about any of it. He looked at her name on those pages, the precise fabrication of it. He handed the tablet back. "How long?" he said, and his voice came out lower than he expected. "Do we have before they move?" "We believe they're waiting for confirmation that you've landed overseas," Yoon said. "Once they're certain you're unreachable, then we don't let them become certain." He turned back to the monitors. On the feed from the upper residential floor, Amara's bedroom light was still on. He could see her at the desk, pencil moving, the small, focused motion of a woman building something in the middle of a house that was doing everything in its power to tear her down. He watched her for a long moment. Then the light in the financial records room on the ground floor flickered on. Kyung-tae had just entered it, alone, after midnight, with a briefcase. Joon-Ho's jaw tightened. "Get everyone in position," he said. "Nobody moves yet. I want the whole picture." "And your family?" He was quiet for 3 full seconds. "They're not going anywhere." He pressed his palm flat against the cold metal of the surveillance panel. 47 cameras. One house. His cousin stuffing documents into a briefcase at 12:30 in the morning, while his wife drew load-bearing columns by lamplight on the floor directly above. He had told Amara, more times than he could count, across 5 years of her trying to tell him something was wrong. "They're still my family." He had been wrong about what that meant. He had been using the word as a shield, not for them, he understood now, standing in the dark with his hand flat on cold metal, for himself. Because the alternative was admitting that the people he'd grown up with, the people he'd trusted with his organization and his home and the woman he loved, had been something other than what he'd needed them to be. He watched Kyung-tae pull a document from the briefcase and photograph it with his phone. He watched Amara's bedroom light go out. The house went dark around him, and Joon-Ho Baek stood in the surveillance corridor with the evidence of everything he had refused to see laid out across 47 screens. And he understood that whatever happened next, there was no more room left in his chest for the word family to mean what he had needed it to mean. Something was about to end. The only question left was how loud. And then, before he'd even finished the thought, Yoon's voice came low and precise in his ear, with a single piece of information that Joon-Ho had not been expecting. Something the 72 hours of investigation had not surfaced until this exact moment. Something that changed the dimensions of everything. Not just what was happening in this house, but what this house had been sitting on top of for the past 4 years, patient and buried and waiting. 4 words. "There is a fifth. There is a fifth." Joon-Ho didn't move. His hand was still flat on the surveillance panel, the metal cold against his palm, and he stood there in the dark of the corridor and let the 4 words land fully before he spoke. "Where?" he said, barely above a breath. Yoon's voice came back through the earpiece with the compressed, efficient quality it always carried when the information required care around it. "East Garden. He's been on the ground since this morning. We missed him in the initial sweep because he came through the drainage access on the south wall. Not the primary tunnel." "Who?" A pause. Yoon never paused. In 19 years, the man had delivered information the way machines delivered output. Continuous, uninterrupted, stripped of everything that wasn't the information itself. The pause lasted less than 2 seconds and felt much longer. Han-duk-won. Joon-Ho's jaw tightened until he felt it in his back teeth. Han-duk-won. The name didn't exist in any public record connected to the Bake Syndicate. It existed in internal security files, in encrypted communications from 4 years back, and in the specific permanent memory of everyone who had sat in the room during the negotiations that had nearly become a territorial war between the Bake organization and a rival network operating out of Busan. The negotiations had resolved, barely. Blood had been close. Han had been the Busan network's financial architect, the man who built the money structures, who understood leverage the way surgeons understood tissue, who had sat across a table from Joon-Ho for 6 hours without blinking, and had been, in Joon-Ho's unvarnished assessment at the time, the single most dangerous person in that room who wasn't carrying an actual weapon. Han had disappeared from the Busan network's active roster approximately 14 months ago. 14 months ago was approximately 2 months after Kyung-tae's embezzlement had started accelerating. The arithmetic assembled itself in Joon-Ho's head without being invited, clean and brutal and complete. He's been in contact with Kyung-tae, Joon-Ho said. 18 months of encrypted communication. We found the relay node 40 minutes ago. Yoon's voice stayed flat. The receiving structures in the 3 countries, Han built them. The money wasn't going to Kyung-tae alone. 40% was routing through a transfer layer into accounts connected to the Busan remnant. On the monitor, Kyung-tae was still in the financial records room. His briefcase was open on the table in front of him. He was moving with the careful, slightly too slow deliberateness of a man who is very conscious of the time and is managing himself to not show it. He's armed, Yoon said. How many with him? 2. Positioned at the east garden wall, not approaching the house, they're waiting for a signal. A signal from Kyung-tae. Joon-Ho looked at the monitor. He looked at his cousin, the broad shoulders, the heavy hands, the specific angle of a man who was watching the clock in a room with no visible clock, but tracking the time anyway. The way you track something you've been counting toward for 18 months of patient, careful, criminal work. He understood the full shape of it in the space of approximately 2 heartbeats. Kyung-tae had needed Joon-Ho out of the country, not just for the financial transfers, but because tonight was the night the money moved in full, the final consolidation. The point at which the Busan remnant, funded through 18 months of stolen capital, would have the liquidity to make a move against the Bake organization's eastern operations. With Joon-Ho overseas, with the estate in the specific administrative confusion of a week without its primary authority, with Amara blamed and legally exposed, and the internal family structure distracted by its own petty cruelties, the window would have been perfect. He had come back 4 days early and disrupted every piece of it, except that Han Duk-won was in the East Garden with 2 armed men and a signal that wasn't coming, and when it didn't come, one of 2 things would happen. Han would withdraw and cut his losses. Or Han would decide the operation had been compromised and take the kind of action that men like Han Duk-won took when they decided a situation required cleaning up. And cleaning up, in Han's operational vocabulary, was not a metaphor for retreat. Everyone in position, Joon-Ho said quietly. Nobody moves on Han yet. I want him contained, but I want him where he is. He moved away from the surveillance panel and into the access corridor. And get me confirmation on the dining hall, but my mother is staging something in there tonight. I want audio confirmed before it starts. Already running, Yoon said. She activated the sconces at 7:15. The document is on the table. Joon-Ho stopped walking. The ring is beside it. He started walking again, faster now. He had seen the setup on camera 11. The dining hall feed, the best angle. His mother at the sideboard, removing the folded document, smoothing it flat, setting the replica ring beside it with the careful, precise placement of a woman who has rehearsed the staging in her head and wants the real thing to match. He had understood it immediately, the same way he understood structural problems, not by analyzing each component separately, but by seeing the load-bearing relationship between them all at once. The fake ring, the forged document, the ceremonial lighting, the specific hour, late enough that Amara would be tired, stripped of whatever guard remained after 5 days of absorbing damage, soft in the places that sustained pressure had made soft. His mother knew how to time things. She always had. He went down through the underground infrastructure, moving fast enough that Yoon had to extend his stride to stay 2 steps behind. The secure operations room beneath the East Garden smelled of old coffee and recirculated air and the specific tension of people who have been working through the night at something that matters. 4 of Yoon's analysts at separate stations. Equipment running. The financial picture on 3 screens. Joon-Ho stood at the main monitor for 45 seconds and read the most recent output. Then he looked at Yoon. The dining hall. How long before she makes her move? Based on the household schedule and Amara's movement pattern, we estimate she'll be summoned within the hour. And Kyung-tae? He left the financial records room 8 minutes ago. He's in his quarters with the briefcase. Soo-jin. In the West study. She entered approximately 20 minutes ago. Camera shows her at the desk with a document folder. Joon-Ho looked at the West study feed. His sister, in a robe, moving with the quick, directed energy of someone who has a task and knows it and is trying to complete it in the window that's available. She had the folder open. She was scanning pages. He watched her stand up and move toward the document shredder. "Stop her," he said. Yoon was already at the intercom panel. A brief signal, low frequency. 30 seconds later, on the camera feed, a knock at the West study door. Soo-jin froze. She looked at the door. She looked at the folder. She looked back at the door. And in that 3-second sequence of looks, Joon-Ho saw something he hadn't seen from his sister in years. Not the polished, effortlessly superior exterior she'd maintained since their father died, and the family's expectations had settled on her shoulders in a different way than they'd settled on Joon-Ho's. What he saw was a woman doing rapid, frightened arithmetic. The knock came again. She put the folder back in the drawer, composed her face, opened the door and said something to the security guard in the mild, slightly inconvenienced tone she used with staff when she wanted to communicate that she wasn't bothered, that whatever this was had interrupted nothing significant. Then she went back to her quarters. "Secure the West study," Yoon said into his secondary channel. "Full inventory on that bottom drawer before anything is touched." Joon-Ho watched the study door close on the feed. He thought about the last time he and Soo-jin had talked without an agenda between them. 3 years ago, maybe. In the garden. She'd been having a hard season, and he'd sat with her for an hour, and they hadn't discussed anything that mattered to either of their professional lives. It had felt real. He had remembered it as real. He now had to hold that memory next to the image of her standing at a shredder with a document folder in her hands, and the two things did not fit together in a way he could resolve cleanly. He didn't try to resolve it. He put it where he put everything tonight, filed, time-stamped, accessible later when later existed. The hour that followed was the longest kind of hour, the kind where each minute has more weight than a minute should reasonably carry. He stayed in the underground room and watched the feeds and spoke to Yoon in low, clipped exchanges and drank 2 cups of the old coffee without tasting either of them. And at 20 minutes past 9, he watched Amara receive the summons from Bina, the young household assistant who delivered it with the specific blankness of a person who has been told something and has decided that not understanding it is the safest posture available. He watched Amara receive the message, watched her look at Bina's face instead of listening to the words, watched her make the translation that her 5 years in this house had equipped her to make. She knew, not the specifics, but she knew the shape of it. He watched her change clothes. Not dramatically, not a performance. Just the particular choice of a woman who has decided that whatever she is walking into, she is walking into it composed. Dark dress. Simple. Her own. He watched her check her reflection with the dispassion of someone running a final inspection before entering hostile territory, and something in his chest did the thing it had been doing all night. The specific, corrosive thing that didn't have a clean name, that was not anger and was not grief, but lived adjacent to both. She went downstairs. He moved to the primary access corridor, positioned himself at the panel adjacent to the dining hall, the one that looked like wainscoting from the dining hall side, that appeared on no floor plan, that he had known about since he was 17 years old because his father had shown him the way his father had shown him every hidden thing in this house, believing that the knowledge of what was hidden was itself a form of protection. He pressed his ear to the panel. Through the acoustic material, he could hear the room, the slight echo of the high ceiling, the low sound of the sconces, and then footsteps, and then the quality of silence that a room develops when the person who is about to experience something walks into it not knowing what they're about to experience. He heard Amara's footsteps stop. He heard his mother's voice, that measured, unhurried tone, the performance of patience. "Thank you for coming." He heard Amara's voice, and what struck him immediately was the thing it didn't do. It didn't waver. It didn't accelerate. It came back steady and neutral, the way she had been steady and neutral through 5 days of being picked apart, and the steadiness of it did something to him that anger hadn't quite managed. "Where is he?" Amara said. "He's managing his affairs overseas. This was not a decision he made lightly, and he did not want the conversation to be complicated by distance. He asked me to facilitate. He sent my ring back." He felt it was appropriate, a gesture of respect. A pause. Joon-Ho pressed his palm flat against the panel. "Can I read it?" "Of course." He stood in the dark and listened to the silence of her reading. It was a specific silence, not absent, not empty, but full of the particular quality of a person moving through language the way she moved through everything, methodically, without skipping, understanding structure rather than just surface. He counted the seconds. He knew how long 3 pages took to read if you actually read them. She read every word. When she set the last page down, she said, "I want to call him." He specifically asked that there be no calls. "I don't care what he said through you." The steadiness in her voice had developed an edge. Not rage, not yet, but the specific sound of a surface that has been smooth so long that the roughness underneath has become surprising even to the person revealing it. "I want to hear my husband's voice. Amara, this document ends my marriage." No performance in it, no rhetoric, just the flat absorption of a fact she was still processing while simultaneously refusing to fully accept. "I want 5 minutes and a phone before I accept that." Then Kyung-tae stood up. Even through the panel, Joon-Ho heard the chair move. And he knew. He knew immediately, with a specific knowledge of a man who had spent decades reading the body language of people under pressure, that it was the wrong move. The move of a man whose instincts had been calibrated by decades of rooms where standing up was sufficient to end conversations. "You've been given every courtesy," Kyung-tae said. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." What came back from Amara was something Joon-Ho had never heard from her. Not the careful control, not the managed neutrality. Something that had been compressed past the point where compression was possible, finally finding the only direction left. "Sit down," she said. A beat of silence. "I'm not speaking to you. I'm not signing anything because of you. If you stand there long enough, I'm going to say things in this room that will still be true long after tonight, and you would prefer that I don't." Then back to his mother. "I want to call Joon-Ho. The call would only prolong your pain. Let me decide that. He has been clear." "You keep telling me what he said through you." Her voice cracked. Not with tears. With something harder than tears. The thing that precedes tears when tears are not yet available. When the body is still managing too much for grief to get a foothold. "You keep telling me what my husband said, in a room I wasn't in, and you're asking me to end my marriage based on a signature on a piece of paper. Give me a phone." Silence. Then his mother's voice, stripped of the gentleness now, the performance of reasonableness gone, the last layer of managed presentation removed. "You will not be able to reach him." Amara stopped. "He has given instructions, to his staff, to his security team, to everyone around him. You will not be put through. If you attempt to contact him through back channels, those channels have been closed. I want you to understand that this has been arranged carefully, not to hurt you, because it is the cleanest way." Joon-Ho pressed his thumb against the panel release. The mechanism was pneumatic, near silent. The panel swung inward. He stepped through it into the dining hall light. His footsteps hit the hardwood and the sound traveled, and Amara turned before anyone else in the room had processed what was happening. Turned because her body knew his footsteps the way bodies know the specific sounds that belong to their lives, before the mind has had time to confirm or deny. He watched her face move through the sequence. Recognition, disbelief, something past relief that had no clean name, a kind of devastation that comes when you have been holding yourself together so tightly for so long that the sudden removal of the reason to hold on is almost as hard as the holding was. Her hand came up to her mouth, briefly. Then it came down and she straightened because she was Amara, and even now, even in this moment, she straightened. He gave himself 2 seconds to look at her. Then he turned to the room. Kyung-tae had gone the color of old concrete, drained, not pale, something deeper than pale, like the blood had simply decided to go elsewhere and hadn't communicated a return timeline. Soo-jin was on her feet without being aware she'd stood, her chair pushed back at an odd angle, both hands loose at her sides. And his mother, Madame Sun-hee, stood at the far end of the table beside the document and the replica ring, and her face was doing the most difficult thing a face can do, maintaining composure in a room where composure had just become entirely irrelevant. Joon-Ho walked to the table. He picked up the document. He read it. Not all of it. He'd seen the template in Yoon's materials, but enough to confirm what he already knew. He set it back down. He picked up the replica ring and held it between 2 fingers, feeling the weight of it, the wrong weight, the weight of something that had been built to pass a glance and nothing more. He looked at his mother. "I wasn't abroad," he said. The room held very still. "I've heard every word spoken in this house for the last 3 days. Madame Sun-hee looked at him. She was the only person in the room who hadn't broken in some visible, physical way. She was looking at her son with an expression that baffled him even now, even after everything. Not guilt, not the specific expression of a person who has been caught. Something that looked almost like sorrow. As if the problem here wasn't what she had done, but what his discovering it was costing him. "Joon-Ho, don't," he said. She closed her mouth. He crossed to Amara. He moved through the room with the specific deliberateness of a man who is aware of every camera behind every wall and every piece of evidence being time-stamped in real time, and who is also, underneath all of that infrastructure, just a man walking toward his wife in a room that tried to take her from him. He stopped in front of her. He said, quietly enough that it lived between them and not in the room, "I'm sorry." She looked at him. Her jaw was set. Her eyes had the specific clarity that eyes get when someone is refusing, through sheer will, to let them do something else. "How long?" she said. 3 days. "You've been here 3 days." "Yes." "You watched." Not a question, a statement being confirmed. "Yes." "All of it?" "Yes." She breathed in through her nose, a slow, deliberate breath, the breath of a person managing something enormous in a very limited space. Then she turned slightly away from him. Not rejection, not even close, just a quarter turn that gave her face somewhere else to look, while she absorbed what she needed to absorb. He let her. He understood that need, even now, even with everything else in the room demanding his attention. He turned back to Kyung-tae. "How much did you take?" he said. Kyung-tae's jaw moved. The calculations behind his eyes flickered through several things: denial, deflection, the search for an angle, and then flickered out one by one, like lights going off in a building being evacuated floor by floor. "Joon-Ho, let me explain the context. I have the accounts. The shell companies, the receiving structures in 3 countries, your communications with the law firm, the document they prepared with her name on it." He said it without emphasis, without performance, just the flat delivery of a man reading from a very complete list. "I have the media envelope from the West study. I have the photograph you took in the financial records room at 12:30 this morning." He paused. "How much did you take?" Kyung-tae's mouth opened and closed once. Then he said a number. The number landed in the room like something physical. Soo-jin made a sound. Not quite a word. Not quite not a word. Something that came from a place past articulation. And Madame Sun-hee, for the first time, looked away from her son and looked at Kyung-tae instead. And the expression on her face was something Joon-Ho had never expected to see there. It was not the face of a co-conspirator who had known the full scope. It was the face of a woman who had known a number was coming and had not known how large it was. And the size of it had done something to her expression she hadn't been able to prevent. He filed that. He turned to Soo-jin. She was standing with her hands clasped in front of her now, the knuckles visible, her face carrying the mottled, compressed quality of someone who had been crying internally for a long time without the release of actual tears. "The envelope," he said. "I didn't send it," she said, quickly, immediately, as if the speed of the denial changed what had existed before it. "It was never. You prepared it." "I was told." "By who?" He already knew. He wanted her to say it. He wanted it on the record, on Yoon's running audio, in the specific language of her own voice so that there was no room for revision later. She looked at her mother. The look was not accusatory. It was something more helpless than accusatory. The look of a person who had believed they were operating under a sanction that was now quietly being withdrawn, who was only now understanding what it meant to be the instrument rather than the architect. Madame Sun-hee said nothing. Soo-jin turned back to Joon-Ho, and the tears came finally, breaking through the composure she'd been maintaining with both hands all night. "I didn't understand all of it," she said. "I didn't know about the forgery. I didn't know how much he took. I thought it was about protecting the family." "From what?" Joon-Ho said. She didn't answer. The honest answer was visible anyway. In the specific way she didn't answer it. It lived in the direction her eyes moved, which was briefly, involuntarily, to Amara. From her. From the thing Joon-Ho's choice had represented. From the woman who had arrived in this house 5 years ago and had never, not once, been allowed to be simply a person who lived here. He looked at his mother last. Madame Sun-hee was watching him. She had been watching him from the moment he stepped through the panel. And what was on her face, even now, even with the room in full collapse around her, was not what he had expected. Not defiance. Not the brittle, maintained dignity of a woman holding a position under fire. Something tired her. Something that had been carrying its own weight for years and had perhaps not fully accounted for how heavy it would feel when the carrying finally stopped. "You arranged my schedule," he said. "Every trip in the last 18 months. You identified the windows." "I managed your calendar, as I have always. You identified the windows when I would be furthest from the estate. You communicated those windows to Kyung-tae. You knew what the money was doing." He moved toward her. One slow step, the kind of step that says, "I am not rushing this. I am going to stand here until you hear every word." "And you approved the documentation that put her name on it." Madame Sun-hee held his gaze. "I approved a contingency, a protective measure. If the organization ever came under external, you put her name on it," he said. Quiet, absolute. "You built a legal case with forged evidence to make her the face of a crime your nephew committed. In my house. With my name as the authority behind it." He was close enough now that the conversation required nothing above a murmur. "You did this to the woman I chose." "You chose wrong," Madame Sun-hee said. No softening, no apology in the delivery. The flat, certain conviction of a woman who has organized her entire life around a belief and sees no reason, even now, even here, to pretend the belief has changed. "I have said nothing for 5 years because you are my son, and I respected your authority in your household. But the organization, the legacy, the connections this family requires to survive, all of it has been placed at risk by a choice you made from sentiment rather than strategy. I tried to correct that without destroying you." The room was absolutely silent. Joon-Ho looked at his mother for a long moment. Something passed through his face, complicated and irreversible, the specific expression of a man who has just heard the truest version of something he has been half-knowing for years and has now lost the option of half-knowing. She had not said it from cruelty. She had said it because she believed it, completely and without ambiguity, the way people believe things they have built their entire lives on top of. That was what made it worse than cruelty. He stepped back. He reached into his jacket and placed his phone on the table, screen up, the active call to Director Yoon visible. It had been running since the moment he stepped through the panel. Every word, every number Kyung-tae had said, every word his mother had just said. Madame Sun-hee looked at the phone on the table, and for the first time tonight her composure showed a crack, not in her face but in the stillness of her hands, which tightened slightly against each other in her lap. The financial records, the communication logs, the forged documents, and this conversation are being compiled, Joon-Ho said. Every entrance to this estate is currently secured. Nobody leaves without my authorization. He picked up the phone. What happens next is not a family conversation. It is a reckoning. He looked at Kyung-tae, at Soo-jin, at his mother. You each need to think carefully about what you're willing to say and what you're willing to face, because the only version of this that offers any consideration at all is the version where I hear the complete truth before anyone else does. He turned around. Amara was still near the doorway. She had been there since he'd first crossed to her, and she was watching him with an expression that had finished processing and arrived somewhere past it, not the overwhelmed look of a woman who needed saving, not relief, not even gratitude. The clear, specific attention of a woman watching someone she loves do something genuinely hard and holding the full weight of what it is costing him in real time. He walked to her. Stopping in front of her again, he was aware that he had more to say than he knew how to say in this room with these people watching on this particular night. But the thing that would not wait, the thing that pressed forward regardless, was simple. I should have listened, he said. Every time you told me something was wrong in this house, I told you they were family. I used that word to end the conversation. He looked at her directly. I ended the conversation because I wasn't ready to see what it would have shown me. That's on me. She looked at him for a long moment. Her chin was up. The steadiness was back, but different now. Not the managed steadiness of a woman holding herself together in hostile territory. Something more grounded than that. We're going to talk about this, she said. Not here, not tonight, but we are going to talk about it, and you are going to listen the way you didn't listen before. I know. Everything, she said. I know. She nodded. Small, precise. Then she looked past him at the room, at the table with the forged document and the replica ring, at Kyung-tae standing with his hands at his sides and his future dismantling itself around him, at Soo-jin's wet face and clasped hands, at Madame Sun-hee at the far end, still upright, still watching her son with that sorrowing expression, and she took a breath, slow, full, the breath of a woman refilling something that has been running dangerously low for days, and said, very quietly, to no one and everyone, I never wanted any of this to have to happen. Nobody answered. There was nothing to answer with. And then Yoon's voice came through the earpiece. Quiet, immediate, with the compressed urgency of a man delivering information that cannot wait. And what he said changed the shape of everything in the room because Joon-Ho had believed, standing there, that the worst of it was behind them, and Yoon's 4 words had already proven once tonight that Joon-Ho's beliefs about what he had fully accounted for were not as reliable as he thought. This time it wasn't 4 words. This time it was 1 sentence delivered in Yoon's characteristic flatness that landed in Joon-Ho's chest like something dropped from a significant height. Han Duk-won is no longer in the East Garden. Han Duk-won is no longer in the East Garden. Joon-Ho moved before the sentence had fully finished arriving. He turned from Amara, from the room, from the assembled wreckage of his family, and his hand was already at his earpiece, pressing the receiver tight against his ear canal because he needed every word Yoon said next to arrive without interference. Direction, he said. South wall. He's moving toward the house. A half-second pause. He's not trying to conceal it. That was the part that stopped something in Joon-Ho's chest, not the movement itself. He had anticipated Han moving, had built contingencies around Han moving, had positioned security accordingly. What he hadn't anticipated, what the contingencies hadn't fully accounted for, was the specific quality of that movement. Han Duk-won had spent 14 months operating in the dark, building structures through relay nodes and encrypted channels and shell entities designed to exist without leaving footprints. A man like that, in a situation like this, should be retreating, should be cutting losses, should be doing the precise, careful thing that men who have survived a long time in dangerous work do when they understand the operation is compromised. He was walking toward the house without concealment, which meant he knew something that changed his calculation, something that made retreat less viable than approach, something that gave him, in his own assessment, a reason to come forward instead of back. Where are his 2 men? Joon-Ho said. Still at the East Garden wall. They haven't moved. They're not with him. No. He turned back to the dining hall. The room had registered the shift in him. The way a room registers when the person managing the situation has received information that changes the situation. The specific quality of attention that sharpens in a group when the person they are all watching suddenly becomes more focused and less available. "Everyone sit down and do not move," he said. Not loud, the kind of not loud that is more commanding than loud, that carries the weight of someone who has never needed volume to be heard. Kyung-tae sat. Soo-jin, already seated, pressed herself back into the chair as if trying to reduce her own surface area. His mother stayed standing. Of course she did. Joon-ho's security team, the 3 men who had come through the main entrance when Yoon called them in, were already repositioning without being told, which was what made them worth what he paid them. 2 to the dining hall entrance, 1 to the corridor junction. Hands visible, posture communicating readiness without broadcasting it. Kyung-tae! Joon-ho crossed to the table in 4 steps and stood directly in his cousin's sight line, blocking the door behind him, blocking the clock on the wall. "Han is moving toward the house. He's not retreating. Tell me why." Kyung-tae's eyes had gone to the door the moment Joon-ho mentioned the name, the instinct of a man whose nervous system was tracking a timeline he'd built himself and couldn't stop tracking even now. "I don't. Joon-ho leaned forward, both hands on the table's surface, close enough that the conversation had nowhere to go except between the 2 of them. "You know why he's moving. You built this. You know every piece of it. Tell me why he's coming toward the house instead of pulling out." Kyung-tae's jaw worked. The calculations that had been running behind his eyes all night, the continuous, exhausting arithmetic of a man who has been managing a deception for 18 months and has never fully stopped managing it even as it collapsed around him. Those calculations were still running, still looking, still searching for the angle that wasn't there. "There's a secondary," he said finally. Quiet. The voice of a man who has made a decision about which piece of information to trade for what he thinks it might buy him. If the primary consolidation didn't complete by midnight, he was supposed to move on the Incheon warehouse. Joon-ho straightened. "That's the warehouse target." "Yes." "Then why is he moving toward the house?" Kyung-tae looked at the table. That was when Joon-ho understood. Not from what Kyung-tae said, from the exact quality of the silence that came after the question, the specific texture of a silence that is not empty but full, packed tight with something the person generating it has decided costs more to say than not to say. The silence of a man who has crossed many lines tonight and has found, at the bottom of all of them, one line he cannot bring himself to cross out loud. Joon-ho turned and looked at Amara. She was standing 6 feet from him, near the corridor entrance, and she had been watching the whole exchange with the focused, structural attention she brought to everything, reading the load-bearing elements, understanding where the weight was distributed, finding the gap. She saw him turn and look at her, and something in her expression shifted. Not fear, not yet, but the particular recognition of a person who has just understood that they are the subject of the sentence being not spoken. "Her," Joon-ho said, not to Kyung-tae, just the word, placed in the room like something set down on a table. Kyung-tae said nothing, which was its own complete answer. Joon-ho crossed the room in under 2 seconds. He was behind Amara before she had fully processed that he was moving, his back to the corridor wall, facing the room and the doorway simultaneously, putting his body between her and the entrance with the specific, practiced placement of a man who has spent his entire adult life understanding the geometry of threat. "Yoon." His voice had gone completely flat. The flatness that lives past anger, past urgency, in the place where everything has been stripped down to pure function. Change of information. Han's target is not the warehouse. The warehouse is cover. His operational secondary is a person on these grounds. A half-second of silence on the earpiece. Then, "Copy. East Garden team repositioning now." "How long?" 3 minutes to coverage on the south approach." 3 minutes. He pressed his back harder against the corridor wall and listened to the house. The low hum of the climate system, the distant sound of a security door somewhere in the east wing, the ordinary sounds of a structure that contained an extraordinary and rapidly deteriorating situation. Then he heard it. The specific click of a latch mechanism, the sound that a door makes when it has been held against its frame by its own weight, and something on the other side has decided that was insufficient. The East Wing service entrance, 30 feet down the corridor from the dining hall opening. Everyone in the room heard it. The security man at the corridor junction moved his hand. Joon-Ho shook his head once, a small, precise motion. Not yet. Footsteps. One set, moving without rushing, without any attempt at concealment, with the specific quality of movement that belongs to someone who has accepted being heard and has made the decision that speed is now more useful than silence. Han Duk-wan stepped into the corridor. He was smaller than the name suggested. This was something Joon-Ho had noted 4 years ago and noted again now. The specific gap between a man's reputation and his physical presence, which in Han's case was deliberate, cultivated, part of what made him effective. Compact. Well-dressed in a way that shouldn't have been possible for a man who had come through a drainage access tunnel, but was, because Han was the kind of person who planned for every variable, including what he would look like if the plan went wrong. His movement had the controlled, unhurried quality of someone who had trained, a long time ago, in something that had made him very difficult to surprise. He stopped when he reached the edge of the dining hall light. He looked at the security team, then he looked past them, into the room, and found Joon-Ho. He smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a nervous one. The smile of a man who has looked at a situation accurately and found something in the accuracy of it that he can respect. "You came back early," he said. Korean, precise, without regional inflection. "I didn't think you would." "I know," Joon-Ho said. "It was a good plan." "Parts of it. The financial architecture was clean. You always built clean structures." Joon-Ho moved forward one step. The security team moved with him. "The rest of it you outsourced to people who did sloppy work." Han's eyes moved briefly to Kyung-tae. The look wasn't warm. It wasn't even contemptuous. Contempt required a kind of investment that Han apparently hadn't made in Kyung-tae. It was the look of a professional briefly acknowledging a tool that had underperformed. "Your men," Joon-Ho said. "Where?" "In custody, I imagine." Han looked around the room, cataloging, the way he always cataloged, taking inventory of a scene with the efficient attention of a man who never stopped working even when the work had visibly failed. "You moved fast." "I had time to prepare." "Apparently." His eyes settled on the document still centered on the mahogany table, on the replica ring, on the assembled family members in various states of collapse. He took it all in and said, without irony, without any performance attached to the observation, "This is messier than I thought it would be." "It usually is. Family operations always are. Factual, flat. That's why I don't use family." "Then you made a mistake choosing Kyung-tae." "Several mistakes." Han said it with the dispassion of a man conducting a post-operation debrief on himself, efficient and unsentimental. Choosing Kyung-tae was the first. Agreeing to the documentation scheme was the second. Too many moving parts. "I prefer clean operations." His eyes moved to Amara. He looked at her for a moment. Not long, not with anything that could be called particular feeling, but with the assessing quality of a man confirming information he already has. "The secondary was a contingency I didn't want to use." "But you prepared it." "I prepare everything." "I know." Joon-Ho took another step. "That's why I need you to understand something carefully. The warehouse teams are already there. Your 2 men from the garden are in custody. Whatever financial positions we're supposed to consolidate tonight are not consolidating." He was close enough now that the conversation required no projection at all. "You have one path out of this building that doesn't end your operational career permanently. It involves a complete account of every communication with Kyung-tae, every financial structure you built, and the names of everyone in the Busan remnant who contributed resources to this." Han looked at him. He was not frightened. He was evaluating, the way he had evaluated everything for the last 4 years. Running the full calculation, assessing the angles, finding where the leverage was distributed. The calculation was taking longer than it should have. "You'll use what I give you," Han said. "Against the Busan network, yes. And me. That depends on what you give me and how you give it." A long moment. Joon-Ho watched the decision happen behind Han's eyes. Not the moment of surrender exactly, but the moment of pragmatic acceptance. The specific moment when a professional accepts that the variables have shifted past the point where resistance generates better outcomes than cooperation. I want it in writing, Han said. Whatever you're offering. You'll get it when you've given me something worth putting in writing. Han breathed out through his nose, a slow, measured breath. The breath of a man who has been managing his own physiological responses for so long it has become indistinguishable from calm. Start with the Busan accounts, he said. I'll give you the relay node access codes. You can pull the full transaction record yourself. I'm not narrating 18 months of financial architecture from memory. Fair enough. Joon-Ho looked at his security man near the door. Get Director Yoon in here. Then back to Han. Sit down. Han Duk-won walked to the table and sat down. He sat at the same table as Madame Sun-hee, as Kyung-tae, as Soo-jin, and no one said anything about the strangeness of it, because the strangeness of it was the least strange thing that had happened in this room tonight. Yoon came through the main corridor entrance 2 minutes later, tablet in hand, 2 analysts behind him. He swept the room with one look, filed everything, and moved directly to Joon-Ho's side. Han gave the relay node access codes. Yoon's analysts were into the financial architecture in under 4 minutes. What came up on the tablet screen was more extensive than the worst estimate the underground operations room had produced. Joon-Ho leaned over Yoon's shoulder and read it. The full scope of it, the timeline, the amounts, the structure of the Busan reorganization, the names attached to the receiving accounts. And what he was reading was not the record of a remnant. It was the record of an ongoing operation, patient, funded, increasingly sophisticated over 18 months. Joon-Ho straightened up. He looked at Han. The Busan network isn't a remnant. Han held his gaze and said nothing, which was its own confirmation. It never was. Joon-Ho looked back at the tablet. Kyung-tae thought he was funding an independent exit operation. He was funding a re-entry. He set the tablet down on the table, carefully. The way you set something down when what you want to do with it is something else entirely. Who is running it? Han said nothing. The relay nodes go somewhere. The accounts have a source. Someone above you authorized the 18-month timeline and provided the foundational capital. Joon-Ho looked at him directly. Who is running the Busan network? That information, Han said, was not part of the arrangement we discussed. The arrangement we discussed was based on incomplete information. Then we should revisit the terms of the arrangement before. Yoon set the tablet in front of Joon-Ho without speaking. He had turned it to a specific screen. A final transaction record, surfaced in the last 3 minutes of the access code excavation. A payment made 3 weeks ago from an account that the analysts had flagged in the first 30 seconds of accessing the relay node because of the age of it, the foundational quality of it, the specific kind of account that predates a network's public reorganization and carries the institutional weight of original establishment. Joon-Ho looked at the name attached to the account. He looked at it for 5 full seconds. Choi Byung-soo. The dining hall continued around him, Han at the table, Kyung-tae, Soo-jin, his mother, Yoon at his shoulder, Amara 6 feet to his right, the sconces doing their warm, ceremonial work on the mahogany surface, all of it continuing, all of them breathing. Choi Byung-soo, the man who had sat across from Joon-Ho 4 years ago during the Busan negotiations. Not Han, above Han. The network's senior leadership, who had, according to every source Joon-Ho had cultivated and trusted, according to the settlement terms that had ended 6 hours of table negotiations, according to 4 years of subsequent intelligence, retired from operational involvement, relocated outside Korea, removed himself from the active structure as a condition of the agreement that had kept both networks intact. The payment was dated 3 weeks ago. Joon-Ho picked up the tablet. He looked at Yoon. For the first time in 3 days, Yoon's face was doing something other than nothing. The specific micro-expression of a man holding himself very still, because any movement would constitute a reaction, and he was not yet ready to commit to one. How long has this account been active? Joon-Ho said. The analysts are pulling the full history. Based on the access pattern, it was dormant for approximately 14 months following the settlement, then low-level activity for 18 months. Then this. The same 18 months as Kyung-tae? Yes. Joon-Ho set the tablet down. He turned to Han. Han had seen the screen from across the table. He had seen Joon-Ho's face when he read the name. He was watching now with the expression of a man who has just understood that the bargaining chip he offered was significantly smaller than the information it led to, and the gap between those two things has just fundamentally altered the value of every calculation he has made in the last 20 minutes. You knew Choi was still running it, Joon-Ho said. Han looked at the table. It was the first time tonight he had looked at the table instead of the person speaking to him. In someone less controlled, it would have been obvious. In Han, it was the equivalent of a signed confession. Where is he? Joon-Ho said. I don't know his current location. That is the wrong answer to give me right now. It is the true answer. Han looked up, not with defiance, with the specific directness of a professional who has decided that honesty is now the more strategic option. I communicated through intermediaries. I have relay addresses. I don't have physical location. The relay addresses. That was not part of... The arrangement changed the moment his name appeared on that screen, Joon-Ho said. The flatness in his voice had developed an edge. Not rage, nothing as simple as rage, but the specific temperature of a man who has just understood that the thing he thought he was dealing with tonight was the surface of something that went much deeper and had been going deeper for 4 years while he believed it was resolved. Relay addresses. Now. Han held his gaze for a long moment. The professional composure was thinning at the edges, but not breaking, but becoming visible as a thing being maintained rather than a thing that came naturally. If I give you the relay addresses, Han said, and you use them to locate Choi, Choi has structures I don't have full visibility on, people I've never met. The reach of what comes back from finding him is not something I can protect myself from. You should have considered that before you spent 18 months helping him rebuild the network that was going to burn this house down, Joon-Ho said. Relay addresses. Another moment. Then Han gave them. Yoon was already on the secure channel before Han had finished, relaying to the underground room. The work would take time, hours, possibly longer, but the thread was live, and a live thread in Yoon's hands had never stayed cold. Joon-Ho stepped back from the table. He looked at the room. Then he looked at Kyung-tae. The Eastern Division, he said. The work you did there. 15 years of it. He held his cousin's gaze. I knew what you built. I knew what it cost you. I didn't say it enough. He paused. That's true. And it's true regardless of everything else that happened tonight. Kyung-tae looked at him. His face did something complicated and private and painful. The expression of a man receiving something he has wanted for years, and receiving it at the precise moment when it can no longer do him any practical good whatsoever. He didn't speak. He nodded once. Small, exhausted. Joon-Ho turned and walked out. Amara was in the corridor. She had slipped out just before him, and she was standing against the wall with her arms folded. Not against cold, but in the way people fold their arms when they are holding themselves together from the outside, because the inside is managing something that exceeds the available space. He stopped beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The house made its sounds around them. Choi Byung-soo, Amara said, quiet. Yes. The man from 4 years ago. Yes. She looked at the wall across from her. So it wasn't over when you thought it was over. It wasn't over, he said. She absorbed that. He watched her absorb it, the small adjustments in her expression, the processing, the specific quality of stillness she went to when she was taking something in completely. Is it over now? She said. He thought about Choi Byung-soo somewhere outside Korea, managing relay addresses, waiting for reports that were not going to come. He thought about the thread in Yoon's hands and what it would take to pull it to its source. The part that was in this house is over, he said. The rest takes time. She nodded. That's honest. I appreciate that. He looked at her profile in the corridor light, the line of her jaw, the small scar at her temple from a construction site accident years before he'd known her. He looked at all of it with the attention of a man who has spent 72 hours understanding what carelessness costs, and who has not finished paying that cost, and who knows it. I need to tell you something, he said. She turned to look at him. I'm not asking you to stay because the danger is past. I'm not asking you to stay because you've invested 5 years in this house, or because leaving would be complicated, or because I need you here. He held her gaze. I'm asking you to stay because I love you, and I was wrong about what that required of me, and I know the difference between those two things now. They are not the same request. She looked at him for a long moment. No, she said. They're not. I know the difference now, he said. I didn't before. She looked at him a while longer. Outside, somewhere near the south wall, there was the brief sound of vehicle movement, the last of the evening's perimeter sweep resolving into the specific quiet of a situation that has been contained. The sound faded. You're going to need to show me, Amara said. Not tell me, show me. Over time, in small things, consistently. Not because I don't believe you mean it right now, I do. Because meaning it and doing it are different things, and you know that. I know that. And we're going to have the conversation I mentioned, the one where I talk and you actually listen. Yes. All of it. Everything I held back for 5 years because I thought I was protecting your relationship with your family. Something moved across her face, not bitterness exactly, but the acknowledgement of it, the naming of it, without flinching. All of that gets said. All of it, he said. She unfolded her arms. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. Her hand was cold from standing in the corridor, and he held it between both of his. The way you hold something that has been returned to you when you did not fully deserve the return. And you know it. And you are trying to hold it in a way that communicates that you know it. They stood there for a moment. Then Yoon appeared at the corridor entrance, and the expression on his face, the micro-expression, the one Joon-Ho had learned to read over 19 years of working beside a man who almost never had one, stopped Joon-Ho's breath before Yoon had spoken a single word. The relay addresses, Yoon said. 2 of the 6 are dormant. Standard. Expected. He paused. The third one resolved to an active server in 23 minutes. That's fast, Joon-Ho said. Yes. Yoon held the tablet toward him. The server location is not outside Korea. Joon-Ho took the tablet. He read the address. He read it twice. He looked at the street name, the district, the specific block, and the specific building at the end of that address, which was not an anonymous office and was not a shell company's registered location and was not anywhere in the world that Choi Byung-soo was supposed to have operational presence. It was 12 kilometers from where they were standing. Joon-Ho looked up from the tablet. He never left, he said. Yoon's face did what it almost never did. No, he said. He did not. 4 years of believing the negotiation had resolved the threat. 4 years of intelligence confirming Choi's absence from the active operational picture. 4 years of Joon-Ho rebuilding, expanding, making decisions about the organization's direction based on the assumption that a specific threat had been removed. The threat had been 12 kilometers away the entire time. Not dormant, not retired, patient. Joon-Ho handed the tablet back to Yoon. He stood very still for 3 full seconds. Amara was watching him. She could feel the shift in his hand, the quality of his stillness, and she was reading it the way she read everything, accurately and without softening what she found. What is it? She said. He looked at her. He looked at her and understood that the thing he was about to tell her was going to change the shape of this night again. Not in the direction of resolution, not toward the quiet of a situation contained, but in the direction of something that required a different kind of response entirely. Something that could not be managed from a surveillance corridor or a secure operations room or a position of relative safety 12 kilometers from the source of the problem. Choi Byung-soo never left Seoul, he said. Amara absorbed that. He watched her absorb it, the quick structural processing, the assessment of what it meant for the load-bearing elements of everything that had been resolved in the last 2 hours. Which means, she said slowly, which means everything that happened tonight. The family, the documents, Han, the warehouse, all of it was a distraction. He held her gaze. We were meant to find it. We were meant to deal with it. We were meant to spend tonight exactly the way we spent it, contained here, managing an internal crisis while the actual operation moved. Amara's hand tightened slightly in his. Yoon's voice was already in his earpiece before Joon-Ho had fully finished the thought, and what Yoon said next, in his characteristic 4 words, clipped and irrevocable, was the thing that turned the night from a reckoning into something else entirely. Something that had no ceiling Joon-Ho could yet see, something that had been built and aimed and waiting for exactly this moment, with the patience of a man who had spent 4 years watching and learning and planning from 12 kilometers away while Joon-Ho believed the war was over. The ancient teams are not responding. The ancient teams are not responding. Joon-Ho released Amara's hand. Not roughly, not with the urgency of a man abandoning something, with the specific, deliberate quality of a man setting something down carefully because what comes next requires both hands and he knows it, and she knows it, and neither of them pretends otherwise. He pressed the earpiece hard against his canal. Last contact. 11 minutes ago, Team 1 checked in at the warehouse perimeter. Standard confirmation. Then nothing. Yoon's voice had shed the last of its professional evenness. Not panic, nothing close to panic, but the compressed tension of a man relaying information he does not yet have the full shape of and knows he needs the full shape of immediately. Team 2 was on approach. They haven't checked in at all. 11 minutes. Yes. 11 minutes of silence from 2 teams of men who checked in every 4 minutes by protocol. The arithmetic of that was not ambiguous. Joon-Ho did it in the 2 seconds it took him to turn from Amara and move toward Yoon, and what the arithmetic produced was not a number he could afford to spend time absorbing. "Get me a visual on the warehouse," he said. "Working. The exterior cameras are..." A pause. The kind of pause that is not Yoon's characteristic professional pause. The kind that means the information arriving is worse than the information expected. The exterior cameras are offline. All of them. Simultaneously. Joon-Ho stopped walking. Simultaneous camera failure across an entire facility was not a technical malfunction. Technical malfunctions were sequential, irregular, carrying the specific randomness of equipment failing under load or age. Simultaneous failure across multiple independent systems was a cut. A deliberate, coordinated cut, executed by people who knew exactly where the feeds originated and had either physical access to the infrastructure or technical sophistication sufficient to replicate that access remotely. Choi Byung-soo had been 12 kilometers away for 4 years. He had had 4 years to learn every camera, every feed, every security protocol. 4 years to map the organization's infrastructure from the outside with the patient, accumulative attention of a man who understood that the most dangerous kind of preparation was the kind that looked, from the inside, like nothing at all. "He's already there," Joon-Ho said. "That is my assessment, yes." Joon-Ho turned back to the dining hall. The room registered his return immediately. The shift in his face, the new quality of his movement, the specific change in atmosphere that happens when a situation that was contained becomes a situation that is not. Han, at the table, looked up and read it with the accurate assessment of a professional who has been in enough deteriorating situations to recognize the specific moment of deterioration. Kyung-tae read it too. His eyes went to the door, old habit. The look of a man whose body is still running the survival calculations, even when his mind has accepted that the variables have changed beyond recovery. Joon-Ho pointed at him. "How many people does Choi have?" Kyung-tae's mouth opened. "Don't think about it. Don't manage it. How many?" "I don't know the full number. I dealt with Han. Han dealt with estimate." "At the warehouse?" Kyung-tae's voice had gone rough, stripped of the last of the performance. "Enough to take it. That was the point. Enough to take the warehouse, hold it long enough to complete the transfers through the physical servers, and be gone before your people could regroup." He stopped. "He planned for your teams being there. He planned for resistance." "He planned for my teams," Joon-Ho said, "and he took them out anyway." Kyung-tae said nothing. The answer was already in what he hadn't said. Joon-Ho was already moving out of the dining hall and into the main corridor, his phone out, pulling up a number he hadn't called in 8 months. A man named Guk Hyun, who ran the organization's Eastern Security Division and who, unlike the warehouse teams, was not at the warehouse tonight because Joon-Ho had pulled him for the estate perimeter 2 days ago. He answered on the second ring. I need everything you have mobile, and I need it at the Incheon warehouse in 15 minutes, Joon-Ho said. My teams are dark. Assume the facility is compromised. Do not approach through the main access road. Choi knows it. Come in from the port side through the loading infrastructure. A half second. Understood. 15 minutes. Make it 12. He hung up. Yoon was beside him, tablet up, pulling satellite imagery of the warehouse district. The images were 20 minutes old, the most current available through the channels they could access in real time, and they showed nothing obvious, which was exactly what they would show if Choi's people had been disciplined about their approach. I need to go there, Joon-Ho said. Yoon looked at him. The estate. Han is contained. Kyungtae is contained. My mother and sister are not going anywhere. He took the tablet from Yoon and looked at the satellite image, the warehouse, the port access, the surrounding infrastructure. 43 people inside that building, Yoon, on a regular shift, not operators, logistics coordinators, administrative staff, 3 of my senior distribution managers. He handed the tablet back. I am not managing this from a surveillance corridor. Yoon held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then he turned and began issuing instructions into his earpiece, and the estate shifted. The security rotation, the containment protocols, the specific redistribution of personnel that turns a place from a residence into a lockdown. Joon-Ho went back to the corridor where Amara was still standing. She was watching him approach with the expression he had come to understand as her most honest one, stripped of management, stripped of the careful surface she maintained in hostile rooms, just her face doing what faces do when they are looking at something they are afraid of losing and are trying not to show it. The warehouse, she said. Yes. How bad? He looked at her. He made the decision in the space of one breath, but not to manage this, not to soften it, not to give her the version of it that would worry her less. She had asked him, in the corridor, to be honest. She had said she would work with honest. He was going to hold that. I don't know yet, he said. That's the honest answer. I don't know yet, and I need to go find out. She nodded. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were doing the refusing thing, refusing to let them do what they wanted to do, the specific act of will she had been performing all week, so practiced now it looked almost like calm. Come back, she said. It wasn't a request. It was the kind of statement that functions as a command when the person making it doesn't have the authority to command anything and knows it and says it anyway because the alternative is saying nothing, and nothing is not acceptable. Yes, he said. He took her face in both hands for one moment, held it, looked at her. Then he let go and walked toward the estate's underground access corridor. And he did not look back because looking back was the kind of thing that made your legs slow down when your legs needed to move. The drive took 9 minutes. Joon-Ho was in the back of an armored vehicle with Yoon beside him and 2 of the estate's senior security personnel in the front, moving through the Incheon industrial approach with the lights off because lights were a communication, and they had not yet decided what they wanted to communicate. The port access road was dark and cold and smelled of the harbor, salt and diesel, and the specific industrial cold of a city's working infrastructure at 11:30 at night. His phone rang at the 7-minute mark. Unknown number. He answered it. Silence for 2 seconds. Then a voice he had not heard in 4 years but recognized immediately. The specific cadence of it. The Korean that was too clean, too stripped of regional markers. The voice of a man who had spent decades presenting himself as belonging to no particular place so that no one could use his origins against him. You're faster than I expected, Choi Byung-soo said. Joon-Ho's hand tightened on the phone. He kept his voice level. You've been busy. 4 years is a long time to be patient. You were 12 kilometers away. I was. Something in the voice that wasn't quite amusement, but lived close to it. Did that surprise you? Yes, Joon-Ho said. He said it flatly, without shame in the admission, because Choi was the kind of man who respected accuracy over performance, and Joon-Ho needed the next 90 seconds of this conversation to accomplish something. It surprised me. Good. It was supposed to. A pause. I want you to understand something before tonight finishes. What happened with Kyung Tai? The embezzlement, the family drama, the documentation. I didn't plan that. That was Kyung Tai's initiative. I used it because it was useful. But I didn't build it. You built everything else. Yes, the warehouse. The warehouse, Choi confirmed, and the way he said it, calm, without emphasis, the confirmation of a man who is not threatened by the other person knowing the thing, told Joon-Ho more than the word itself. Your teams were professional, for what it's worth. The past tense landed like something dropped. How many of my people are hurt? Joon-Ho said. Hurt, not dead. I want you to know the distinction was deliberate. A beat. I don't need a war, Joon-Ho. I never needed a war. I needed leverage. Your teams are contained in the warehouse's secondary storage level, unhurt, available for retrieval as soon as this conversation produces something useful. What do you want? A meeting. You're calling me from my warehouse. I'm calling you from a location adjacent to assets that currently belong to both of us, Choi said. The distinction matters. Come to the warehouse. Come alone, or as close to alone as a man in your position can manage. And bring Han's access codes, not the relay nodes. The deeper codes. The ones he didn't give you yet because he didn't think you'd figured out they existed. The line went dead. Joon-Ho lowered the phone. Yoon was watching him with the expression of a man who has heard enough of a one-sided conversation to construct the shape of the other half. He wants a meeting at the warehouse, Joon-Ho said. I heard. He says my teams are alive, contained. Yoon's face did something careful. That could be true. Or it could be the statement designed to get you to come without sufficient backup to make coming dangerous for him. I know. If he wanted them dead, they'd be dead. Choi doesn't make that kind of mistake by accident. I know that too. Joon-Ho looked out the vehicle window at the port approach road, 30 seconds from the warehouse perimeter. He could see the facility from here, the dark exterior, the offline cameras, the specific stillness of a large building from which all its ordinary sound had been removed. No loading dock activity, no interior lighting visible through the upper vents, a building holding its breath. Stop here, he said to the driver. The vehicle stopped. He looked at Yoon. He mentioned codes that Han didn't give me, deeper codes. He watched Yoon's face. You know what he means. Yoon was quiet for 3 seconds. 3 seconds from Yoon was the equivalent of a 5-minute monologue from anyone else. When Han gave us the relay node access codes, Yoon said carefully, our analysts found a secondary encryption layer underneath the node structure. We didn't flag it to you immediately because we were still determining what it contained. A pause. It appears to contain a second tier of financial architecture, separate from everything Han disclosed. Older, more deeply embedded. How much older? The account creation dates go back 6 years. 6 years. 2 years before the Busan negotiations. 2 years before the territorial conflict that had nearly become a war, which meant Choi had been building this, not rebuilding it, building it, before the event that was supposed to have resolved it had even happened. The negotiation 4 years ago hadn't ended a conflict. It had been a pause in one. He came to the table knowing he was going to do this, Joon-Ho said. That is what the account structure suggests, yes. Joon-Ho looked at his hands. They were completely steady. He had noticed this about himself in the worst moments. The steadiness, the specific physical calm that came over him when everything exceeded the threshold where visible reaction was useful. His hands on the cold vehicle upholstery, steady as the hands of a man reading a newspaper. If I don't go in, he said, he holds 43 people and waits. And his operational leverage increases with every hour. If I go in, you go in on his terms, into a space he controls, with his people on the doors and his timeline on the clock. Yes. I can have Guk-hyun's teams on the perimeter in 4 minutes, Yoon said. We can contain the exterior and negotiate from a position of, he'll know the moment they arrive, Joon-Ho said. He's had cameras on this district for 4 years. He knows every approach road, every vehicle profile, every face in my organization that might show up on a perimeter. He looked at Yoon. If he sees us circling the building, he doesn't negotiate. He does what people do when they're circled. Yoon said nothing. The answer was in what he didn't dispute. I'm going in, Joon-Ho said. Then I'm going with you. He said alone. He said as close to alone as a man in your position can manage. Yoon's voice carried something it almost never carried. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of unadorned functional loyalty that was more convincing than warmth would have been. I am within the margin of that definition. Joon-Ho looked at him for a moment. Then he opened the vehicle door. The cold hit immediately. The harbor cold, the specific texture of it, carrying the smell of the water and the industrial dock and the night air above the port. He walked toward the warehouse with Yoon 2 steps behind and 2 of the security personnel another 10 steps back, as close to alone as the situation allowed, which was the honest version of what Choi had asked for, and Joon-Ho had decided to give him the honest version because Choi was a man who had built 6 years of deception and could recognize a counterfeit immediately. The warehouse's side entrance was unlocked. Not forced. Unlocked. The latch turned cleanly from the outside, which meant someone on the interior had unlocked it in advance of their arrival. A detail. The kind of detail that Choi included because including it communicated something. I knew you were coming before you decided to come. I prepared for you. You are moving through a space I have already arranged. Joon-Ho pushed the door open and went in. The interior of the warehouse was not dark. That had been his expectation. The offline cameras, the absent exterior lighting, the stillness of the building had suggested darkness. But inside, the overhead industrial lights were on at partial capacity, casting the high ceiling space in a flat, shadowless light that made distances harder to read than darkness would have. Deliberate. Lighting designed to reduce advantage for people unfamiliar with the space while being navigable for people who had mapped it in advance. The main floor was clear of personnel. The loading equipment was in its standard positions. The organizational infrastructure, the inventory systems, the distribution tracking stations, the manager platforms along the east wall, was undisturbed, which told Joon-Ho that whatever had happened tonight had happened fast enough that the staff hadn't had time to disrupt anything before being contained. He heard them from the secondary storage level before he saw the access door. Voices, low, the compressed sound of people managing their own fear in a confined space. 43 people. He heard 43 people being alive, and he let that land for 1 full second before he moved past it, because letting it land fully would cost him the specific quality of focus the next 10 minutes required. Choi Byung-soo was standing at the center of the main floor. He was 61 years old, and he looked it, not in the way of a man who had aged poorly, but in the way of a man who had aged through sustained, relentless work, and the evidence of that work was in his face and his posture and the particular stillness of a person who has been very dangerous for a very long time and has gotten comfortable with it. He was dressed simply. He had, as far as Joon-Ho could see, no visible weapon. He had 4 men positioned at the cardinal points of the main floor, near the exits, near the storage access, near the manager platform, and they were visible without being theatrical about their visibility, which was itself the most threatening possible arrangement. He looked at Joon-Ho, and his face did something that took Joon-Ho a moment to categorize. It was respect, not liking, not warmth, the specific, unvarnished respect of one professional for another, stripped of every social layer, existing purely as an assessment. You came without an army, Choi said. You have my people in that room. Yes. He looked at Yoon. Director Yoon, your reputation precedes you. Yoon said nothing. His arms were at his sides and his face was doing nothing, and he was, in Joon-Ho's peripheral assessment, probably the most dangerous person in the room, and was communicating that through his posture in a way that required no words. What do you want? Joon-Ho said. I told you on the phone. You told me you wanted a meeting. This is the meeting. Now tell me what you actually want. Choi looked at him for a moment. Then he walked slowly toward the manager platform on the east wall and sat on the edge of it with the ease of a man sitting in his own office. And the ease of it, the comfort of it, the specific quality of a person moving through a space they have inhabited mentally for years before inhabiting it physically, was, in its own way, the most unsettling thing Joon-Ho had seen tonight. The secondary encryption layer, Choi said. You know about it now. Yoon's people have been in it for, he checked his watch, approximately 17 minutes. What they found is the beginning of what's there, not the whole thing. He looked at Joon-Ho. The whole thing is significant. Tell me what significant means. It means that what Kyung-tae was funding, what Han was building, was not a network. It was a transaction, a single, large transaction, structured across 6 years that completes when the secondary layer is fully accessed and the final transfer authorization is entered. He paused. The authorization requires 2 keys. I have one. The second key is embedded in the Beck organization's own financial infrastructure. It has been there for 3 years. It was placed there by someone inside your organization who has been working with me since before the original negotiations. The warehouse was very quiet. Joon-Ho kept his face, doing nothing. The discipline of it, the absolute muscular discipline of keeping his face doing nothing in this moment, cost him more than anything had cost him tonight, because what Choi had just said had a specific implication that arrived fully formed and complete in the space of 1 heartbeat. And the implication was this. There was someone inside the Beak organization, not Kyung-tae, not Han, not anyone who had been in that dining hall tonight, who had been inside the architecture of this plan from the beginning. Who? Joon-Ho said. Choi looked at him. That, he said, is what we're here to negotiate. You want to trade that name. I want to trade that name, the second key, the release of your people from storage, and a full withdrawal from the Incheon operation, all of it clean tonight, in exchange for something specific. He folded his hands in his lap. Territorial recognition, the Western Distribution Corridor, formally acknowledged in documentation that commits the Baek organization to non-interference for a defined period of 5 years. You want me to give you the Western Corridor. I want you to acknowledge what I have already built in the Western Corridor over the last 4 years while you were looking at other things. No aggression in it, the flat accuracy of a man describing existing conditions. I'm not asking for something you have. I'm asking for acknowledgement of something you lost without noticing. Joon-Ho's jaw tightened. 5 years is a long time, he said. 5 years is enough time for both organizations to stabilize around the new boundary. After 5 years, whatever happens is whatever happens. But 5 years of non-interference, documented and committed, is what I need to make what I've built viable long-term. Choi looked at him. You get your people, you get the name of the person inside your organization. You get the second key and the dissolution of the secondary financial architecture. You get a clean extraction from a situation that, if it continues past tonight, will cost you significantly more than a territorial acknowledgement. And if I say no, Choi's face did not change, then we are here for longer than tonight. And the longer we are here, the more of the secondary architecture activates on its automated timeline. I built contingencies into the system. If the second key isn't entered within, he checked his watch again, 48 hours of the primary relay being accessed, the automated protocol begins transferring the embedded assets. Your assets. Out of your infrastructure and into accounts that will take your people weeks to trace. He said it without relish, just the flat delivery of a man describing the terms of a contract. It's not designed to destroy you. It's designed to hurt you enough that the negotiation becomes more attractive than the alternative. You've been planning this since before we sat down 4 years ago, Joon-Ho said. Yes. The negotiation was never a resolution. The negotiation was a pause, Choi said, a necessary one. I needed time to build what I needed to build, and I needed you to believe the conflict was resolved so that you would stop looking in my direction while I built it. He unfolded his hands. I'm not telling you this to humiliate you. I'm telling you because we are at the point in this conversation where honesty is more efficient than posture, and I think you understand that. Joon-Ho understood it. He understood it completely. And the thing that was happening in his chest right now, under the steady hands, under the controlled face, under the professional flatness he had maintained since walking through the side entrance, was not anger. Not the hot directional anger of a man responding to a threat. It was the cold, structural rage of a man looking at 6 years of patient construction and understanding, fully and without softening, that he had been outmaneuvered by someone who was simply better at this particular game than he had been. He had 2 choices. He could reject the terms and fight, mobilize Gukyun's teams, push through the warehouse, take the facility by force, recover his people, and spend the next 6 months dealing with the automated financial protocol while Choi disappeared back into whatever architecture he had built for exactly this contingency. Or he could negotiate. Neither option left him intact. Both options cost him something he couldn't get back. The difference between them was not between winning and losing. That moment had passed, sometime in the 6 years during which Choi had been building and Joon-Ho had believed the threat was resolved. The difference was between losing now, on terms he could see and assess and eventually recover from, and losing progressively over months in ways he couldn't fully anticipate or control. He looked at Choi. "I want my people out of storage before this conversation continues," he said. Choi looked at him for a moment. Then he made a small hand gesture. The gesture of a man communicating a signal he has used before, clean and minimal. Somewhere above them, a door opened. Then the sound of people moving, careful, contained, the sound of people who have been told they can move but are not yet certain what the situation is. Joon-Ho heard his team leader's voice, a man named Sergeant Park, who had been with the organization for 11 years, coming from the secondary storage access stairwell, low and professional. "Sir, we're intact, all personnel accounted for." "Hold on the stairs," Joon-Ho said without turning around. 43 voices going quiet on a stairwell. 43 people alive, doing what they were told, waiting. Joon-Ho turned back to Choi. "The name," he said. "The person inside my organization. I want that first, before any documentation, before any territorial acknowledgement. I want the name, and I want enough corroborating detail that I can confirm it independently." Choi considered this for exactly 4 seconds. "The name," he said, "is someone you have trusted with operational oversight of your financial infrastructure for the last 3 years. Someone who was in a position to place the second key inside your systems without triggering your internal audit protocols." He paused. "Someone who was, until tonight, present in your estate." Joon-Ho went very still. "He wasn't in the dining hall," Choi said. "He was in the estate. In a room you didn't have cameras on because the room was added to the original construction plan after your surveillance infrastructure was installed, and the addition was never integrated into the monitoring system." He looked at Joon-Ho with the expression of a man who has been holding this specific piece of information for last, deliberately, because he understood the weight of it. "The room is on the west side of the estate, ground floor. It was originally designated as secondary archival storage. The room that had been converted, 3 years ago, into a private office for the organization's new chief financial auditor, a man named Park Sung-jin. A man who had been hired on the recommendation of someone Joon-Ho trusted completely. A man who had, 4 days ago, helped Joon-Ho's team pull the initial financial records that had seemed to confirm the scope of Kyung-tae's embezzlement. Records that had, Joon-Ho now understood, been curated before he received them, shaped to show exactly what Choi needed him to see, and nothing more, directing his attention precisely where Choi needed it directed while the real architecture hummed quietly underneath, invisible, patient, waiting for the 48-hour clock that had now begun. Joon-Ho looked at Choi Byung-soo across the flat, shadowless light of the warehouse floor, and he understood that the reckoning he had promised his family tonight was not the largest thing that had happened in the last 72 hours. It was the cover, and somewhere in the west wing of his estate, in a room with no camera, a man named Park Sung-jin was either still sitting at his desk or he was already gone, because men who are inside a plan know when the plan has shifted, and the plan had shifted the moment Joon-Ho walked back through the underground entrance 4 days ago. And if Park Sung-jin was as competent as his 3 years of trusted service suggested, he had known the moment it shifted and had been managing his own exit ever since, which meant that every minute Joon-Ho spent in this warehouse was a minute Park Sung-jin used to put more distance between himself and the thing he had built inside the Baek organization's financial heart, and the 48-hour clock was running, and Choi was watching him do the arithmetic with the patient expression of a man who built the clock and knows exactly how it feels to watch someone else finally hear it ticking for the first time. Joon-Ho's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. A message from an estate security number. 6 words, no punctuation. The abbreviated language of someone sending fast. West Wing office. Empty. Window open. He looked up from the phone. He looked at Choi. And Choi, reading his face with the accurate attention of a man who had been reading faces across difficult tables for 30 years, said, quietly, without performance, with the specific neutrality of a man delivering a fact, "He left 40 minutes ago." The warehouse hummed around them. 43 people on the stairwell, breathing. Yoon at Joon-Ho's shoulder, completely still. 4 of Choi's men at their positions, watching. The flat overhead light making everything look the same distance from everything else. Joon-Ho put the phone in his pocket. He looked at Choi Byung-soo, at the face of the man who had built 6 years of architecture around the specific, patient certainty that this moment would arrive, and had arrived here tonight prepared for every version of it, and was watching Joon-Ho now with the expression of a man who has run a very long operation and has reached the point where the outcome is no longer uncertain enough to require anxiety. And Joon-Ho, standing in the middle of a compromised warehouse with a 48-hour clock running inside his own financial infrastructure and his family in ruins behind him, and the one person who could fully corroborate the second key, now 40 minutes gone into the ancient night, made the only decision that remained, the one that cost him the most, the one that a different version of himself, 6 years ago, before any of this had begun its slow and patient accumulation, would have found unacceptable. He opened his mouth to speak, and what he said in the next 30 seconds would determine whether the next 5 years of everything he had built would survive in any form at all, or whether Choi Byung-soo's 48-hour clock would finish the work that 6 years of invisible architecture had been designed to complete. And the answer he was going to give was not the answer of a man who had won, because he had not won, but the answer of a man who had looked at what losing completely felt like from the inside and had decided, with the cold and total clarity that only that specific vantage point provides, exactly how much he was willing to pay to make sure it did not happen again. "I'll give you the Western Corridor." The words came out level. No hesitation in them. No performance of reluctance. Because Choi Byung-soo was the kind of man who could hear the difference between a decision that had been made and a decision being performed, and Joon-Ho was not going to spend what little leverage he had left on theater. Choi looked at him for a long moment, reading, assessing. Running the same kind of calculation Joon-Ho had watched him run 4 years ago across a negotiating table. The calculation of a man who doesn't trust easily and compensates by being very good at reading the specific quality of truth when it arrives. 5 years, Choi said. 5 years of documented non-interference, starting from tonight. Joon-Ho held his gaze. In exchange for the second key, the full dissolution of the secondary financial architecture, and Park Sung-jin. Park is gone. You know where he went. A pause. I know where he was instructed to go if the operation was compromised. Then you know where he is. Choi was quiet for 3 seconds. In the stairwell above them, 43 people breathed. Yoon stood at Joon-Ho's shoulder and did not move. The 4 positioned men watched without expression, the professional stillness of people who had been told to watch and were watching. The relay address I give you for Park, Choi said slowly, is not part of the Busan network infrastructure. It's separate, personal. If I give it to you, I'm giving you something that connects back to me through channels I would prefer remain private. I know. That concerns you less than it concerns me. Park Sung-jin has been inside my financial infrastructure for 3 years, Joon-Ho said. He built a key into my own systems that I didn't know existed. Whatever channels he connects back to through are not my problem. He is my problem. Give me the address. Another pause. Longer this time. Choi looked at the floor for a moment, the specific gesture of a man running a final check on a decision he has already made but wants to be certain of before committing, and then looked back up. I'll give you the address, he said, after the territorial documentation is drafted and signed. Draft it now, Joon-Ho said. Yoon. Yoon already had the tablet out. He had been building the framework of the document in the background. Joon-Ho had seen him working it in his peripheral vision for the last 4 minutes. the quiet preparatory work of a man who understood what the conversation was moving toward before the conversation arrived there. He turned the tablet toward Joon-Ho. The framework was clean, specific, the kind of document that would survive external scrutiny because it had been written by someone who understood that imprecision was the enemy of commitment. Joon-Ho read it, made two modifications, tightening the geographic boundaries of the Western Corridor definition, adding a clause that made the non-interference commitment conditional on the Busan Network's parallel non-interference with the Baek organization's northern operations. Small changes, significant ones, the kind that communicated to Choi that Joon-Ho was negotiating, not surrendering, and that the distinction mattered to him even now, even at the bottom of this. He handed the tablet back to Yoon, who turned it toward Choi. Choi read it. He read it with the methodical attention of a man who had written enough contracts to know where the weight was distributed and where the gaps were. He read the two modifications without expression. Then he nodded once, and his own phone came out, and he spoke quietly into it in a language Joon-Ho didn't recognize. Not Korean, not the intermediary Chinese he'd expected. Something else. Something that told Joon-Ho there were layers to Choi's operational infrastructure that the relay addresses and the 6 years of architecture were only the surface of. 30 seconds later, his phone buzzed. He read the screen. He looked at Yoon. "Send it to this address," he said, and gave a string of characters that Yoon entered without writing down. The specific memory of a man who had spent 19 years storing information the way other people stored documents. The document transmitted. 30 more seconds, Choi's phone buzzed again. He read it. He looked up. "Signed from our side," he said. "Yoon," Joon-Ho said. Yoon entered his own authorization code. The document sealed. Choi put his phone in his pocket. He reached into his jacket, slowly, visibly, the deliberate movement of a man communicating that what he is reaching for is paper and not a weapon, and produced a folded card. He held it out. Joon-Ho crossed the floor and took it. A physical address. Incheon, 2 kilometers from the port, a building Joon-Ho didn't recognize by name but would have no difficulty locating, and below the address, handwritten in the clean, compressed script of a man who had spent a lifetime writing things meant to be read once and acted on. "He's been there 4 hours. He doesn't know I'm giving you this. Move before he does." Joon-Ho folded the card and put it in his pocket. He looked at Choi one final time, at the face of the man who had outmaneuvered him for 6 years, who had sat across a negotiating table and shaken his hand and agreed to terms while building the architecture that would eventually require renegotiation on worse terms, who had done all of it with patience and discipline and a complete absence of personal animosity, the way a professional does work that is not personal, because personal would make it imprecise. "We understand each other," Joon-Ho said. "We do," Choi said. "If you're in my infrastructure again." "I won't need to be," Choi said. "The Western Corridor is what I built toward. I have it. I don't need anything else from you." A pause. "And you don't want me to need anything else from you?" "No," Joon-Ho said. "I don't." He turned. "Park," he said to the stairwell. Sergeant Park came down first, then the others behind him, the distribution managers, the logistics staff, the administrative personnel who had been held in a secondary storage room for the last several hours, and who emerged into the warehouse light with the blinking, compressed quality of people who had been managing fear for a sustained period and were now in the specific threshold moment between fear and relief, where neither one had yet won. Joon-Ho stood at the base of the stairwell as they came down. He looked at each face. 43 people. He looked at every single one. "Get everyone to vehicles," he said to Sergeant Park. "Medical checks at the estate. Anyone who needs more than that, you call me directly." "Yes, sir." "And Park," the sergeant stopped. "Good work tonight, all of you." He walked toward the side entrance without waiting to see the reaction to that, because the reaction was not what mattered right now, and he had 2 kilometers between him and the man who had spent 3 years inside his financial infrastructure, and the 48-hour clock that Park Sung-jin had built into the system was still running, and Choi's note said, "Move before he does." He moved. The address on the card was a residential building, the kind that sits in the gap between industrial and urban, Too large to be personal and too anonymous to be commercial. The kind of building that people who need to be unremarkable choose specifically because of its unremarkability. 6 floors. Exterior camera on the entrance that Joon-Ho clocked immediately and walked past with his face angled down because he had not brought a team and was not going to announce himself at the door. He went around to the service entrance on the building's east side. It was unlocked. The specific unlocked quality of a door in a building where the security infrastructure was functional, but the security culture was not, where the cameras worked, but no one watched them live. He went in. 3rd floor, room 12. That was what Choi's network had provided to Yoon in the 30 seconds of additional communication before they'd left the warehouse. The specific room number extracted from whatever infrastructure Choi maintained around the people he ran. The small, unglamorous administrative detail of a large operation that Choi tracked because Choi tracked everything. Joon-Ho went up the service stairs. He did not run. Running was a sound, and a sound was a communication, and he was not ready to communicate yet. He went up with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone who has made a decision and is moving toward it at the speed that decision requires, not faster. 3rd floor corridor, flat carpet, low light. The smell of a building that was occupied but not lived in. The specific institutional smell of a place where people slept but did not live. Room 12 was at the end of the corridor. The door had a light under it. Joon-Ho stood outside it for 4 seconds. He thought about what was on the other side. Not the person, he knew who the person was, but the specifics of the situation. One man, potentially armed, who had known for 4 days that the operation he was embedded in was compromised, who had spent 4 days maintaining his cover inside the estate while preparing his exit, who had left 40 minutes ago through a window with a head start and a destination he'd planned in advance. Park Sung-jin was not Kyung-tae. He was not a man running on grievance and desperation. He was a professional who had been placed inside the Beck organization by Choi Byung-soo 3 years ago with the specific patient purpose of this night. And professionals who have been operating undercover for 3 years develop the specific hardness of people who have been someone else for so long that the original person is mostly theoretical. Joon-Ho knocked on the door. 3 seconds of silence. Then the quality of stillness that happens on the other side of a door when the person behind it is making a rapid decision. "It's open," a voice said. Joon-Ho opened the door. Park Sung-jin was sitting at the small desk against the far wall with a laptop open in front of him and his hands visible on the desktop surface, which told Joon-Ho that he had heard the footsteps in the corridor and had made the specific decision of a man who has assessed his options and concluded that the option that keeps his hands visible is the one most likely to produce a conversation instead of something else. He was 40 years old. He had the unremarkable face of someone who had built a career on being unremarkable. The face that didn't register in memory, that didn't attach itself to specific impressions, that passed through rooms without leaving the kind of residue that faces usually leave. Joon-Ho had looked at this face across conference tables for 3 years and had seen, each time, exactly what he was supposed to see. A competent, thorough, professionally cautious financial auditor who asked the right questions and filed accurate reports and gave no indication whatsoever that he was anything other than what he presented himself as. "I wondered if it would be you or Yoon," Park said. "Just me," Joon-Ho said. Park looked at him, reading, doing the same calculation everyone had been doing all night, assessing the variables, looking for the angle that was still open. His eyes were calm. Not the calm of a man who wasn't afraid, but the calm of a man who had decided that fear was not useful information right now and had filed it accordingly. "Choi gave you the address," Park said. "Yes." "He gave you the address?" Park looked at the wall for a moment, processing something that his face suggested was not entirely a surprise, but was still, in some way, landing. "I built 3 years for him, and he gave you the address." "He got what he needed from you," Joon-Ho said. "The key is in the system. The Western Corridor documentation is signed. You were the instrument. The instrument doesn't need to stay intact once the job is done." Park looked back at him. Something moved across his face. Not hurt exactly, but the specific particular expression of a man who has spent 3 years as a professional and has just received an accurate professional assessment of his own expendability. The expression of someone who understood this was how the work went and had believed, until this moment, that the understanding would be sufficient protection against feeling it. The second key, Joon-Ho said, the automated protocol, 48 hours. Walk me through the deactivation. There isn't one, Park said. The room was very quiet. What you built into my system, Joon-Ho said, keeping his voice level, has a deactivation mechanism. Everything Choi builds has an off switch because Choi doesn't build things he can't stop. Walk me through it. The off switch requires the second key and a counter-authorization code, Park said. Choi has the second key. The counter-authorization is here. He turned the laptop slightly toward Joon-Ho, enough that the screen was visible from where Joon-Ho stood. A code. 16 characters. I was going to sell it, Park said simply, when I was far enough away. Insurance. Insurance against Choi. Against everyone. He looked at the screen. I've been someone else for 3 years. I wanted to be done with it. He paused. I'm tired. He said it with the flatness of pure fact, not looking for sympathy, not performing exhaustion, just stating the condition of a man who has been sustaining a deception for 3 years and has reached the end of his capacity for it, and has arrived at this room in this building in Incheon as the final destination of a very long journey that he had perhaps not fully thought through when he started it. Write down the code, Joon-Ho said. Park pulled a pen from the desk, wrote the 16 characters on the notepad beside the laptop, tore the sheet off, held it out. Joon-Ho crossed the room and took it. He looked at it. Then he looked at Park. You're going to come back to the estate with me, he said. You're going to sit with Yoon's analysts and walk them through every piece of the architecture you built inside my system, from the initial placement 3 years ago to the second key to the automated protocol. Every layer, every contingency, every piece of it. And then you're going to give a formal statement that we will use, along with everything else we've compiled tonight, to fully document what Choi Byung-soo built and what it cost. Park looked at him. And then you're out. You're done. Not in the way you planned and not on your timeline, but you're done. Joon-Ho held his gaze. The alternative is that I leave you in this room and let the people Choi sends for insurance purposes find you first. And Choi does send people for insurance purposes. You know that. Park looked at the laptop for a long moment. Then he closed it. He stood up, and he was shorter than Joon-Ho had registered from across conference tables. The specific surprise of encountering someone's actual physical dimensions outside the professional context where you've only ever seen them seated. He looked tired in the way the genuinely tired look. Not performed tiredness, not the tiredness of a dramatic moment, but the specific bodily tiredness of a man who has been running on will for years and has just felt the will run out. All right, he said. They went back through the service stairs and into the Incheon night. Yoon was at the vehicle. Joon-Ho had messaged him from the third-floor corridor. No words exchanged about what had happened in the room. Yoon looked at Park Sung-jin, looked at Joon-Ho's face, and opened the vehicle door. They drove back in silence. The estate at 2 a.m. had the specific quality of a place that had contained a very large thing and was beginning slowly to settle back into its own dimensions. The dining hall had been cleared, the document and the replica ring removed, the evidence packages complete, the principals separated into different rooms for final processing. Kyung-tae in the east guest room with 2 security personnel outside the door. Soo-jin in her own quarters, Yoon's analyst stationed in the corridor. Han Duk-won in the secure anteroom below the east garden, where he had agreed to wait because he had run out of options that didn't require waiting. Madame Sun-hee was in her sitting room. Joon-Ho went there last. She was seated when he entered. Her usual chair, the one she'd sat in for 30 years for private meetings and difficult conversations, and the specific category of discussion that required a room that knew her habits. She was not performing composure at this hour. She was simply sitting, upright, with her hands folded in her lap and her face doing nothing that wasn't genuine. And the genuineness of it was, paradoxically, harder to look at than the performance would have been. He sat across from her. He didn't speak immediately. He looked at his mother's face, the face that had looked at him from the head of family tables his entire life, that had negotiated his father's funeral and his first business decisions and his marriage with the same steady managerial authority, and he tried to find in the looking something he could hold on to that wasn't what tonight had made it. He found it difficult. "Park Sung-jin," he said finally. "Did you know?" She looked at him. "No, you recommended him." "On the basis of his credentials and the recommendation of an associate I trusted." Her voice was level, tired but level. "I didn't know what he was. I want that on the record." "It will be." "And what happened at the warehouse?" "Resolved," he said, "at a cost." She looked at him carefully, reading the specific quality of what he meant by cost. The Western Corridor. Yes. She absorbed that. He watched her absorb it. The precise, adult way she processed information, the way she had always processed information, without outward collapse, by finding the structural implication immediately and working from there. "Your father would have," she started. "Don't," he said. She stopped. "Don't tell me what my father would have done. My father is not here. What happened tonight happened on my watch, in my house, because of decisions I made and decisions I didn't make, and things I looked at and things I refused to look at." He held her gaze. "Including things about you." She was quiet. "You approved the documentation that put Amara's name on a financial crime she didn't commit," he said. "That's not a contingency, and it's not a protective measure. It's a choice. You made it. And the consequence of it is not something I can manage away or document into something smaller than what it is." "I know," she said. "You're going to answer for it formally. Yoon is preparing the documentation. It will be part of the package that goes external." "I know," she said again. The same two words, but carrying something different in them the second time. Not just acceptance of the fact, but acceptance of the full weight of what the fact meant. The long, irrevocable chain of consequences that extended out from this room into the weeks and months ahead. "There's one more thing," he said. She looked at him. "What you said tonight, in the dining hall, that I chose wrong." He paused. Not for effect. To find the precise words for something he had been carrying since the moment she said it. "I know you believe that. I know you've believed it for 5 years. And I know that your belief came from something real. From the world we live in, from what this organization requires, from everything my father taught you about what survival in this world looks like." He looked at her face. "But I need you to understand something. Not for my sake. For yours." She waited. "You spent 5 years in this house with a woman who absorbed every cruelty you and Kyung-tae and Soo-jin directed at her without breaking, without retaliating, without making a single move that would have embarrassed me or damaged what I was building. 5 years. He held his mother's gaze. She held this family's dignity in this house more carefully than anyone in this family did. And you used that dignity as a target. Madame Sun-hee's hands tightened slightly in her lap. A small motion. The only one. "The choice I made," Joon-Ho said, "was right. My understanding of what it required of me was wrong. Those are different things, and I need you to know the difference before anything else between us can be honest." She looked at him for a long time. The sitting room around them was still. Outside, through the window, the estate grounds were dark and quiet, the security rotation moving in its slow perimeter at the edges of the property, the night doing what it did regardless of what it had contained. "She's going to stay," his mother said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She nodded once. Something settled in her face. Not resolution, not reconciliation, nothing that clean. Something more honest than those things. The specific settling of a woman who has maintained a position for 5 years and has just fully, finally, without remaining qualification, accepted that the position was wrong. "I'll be gone by Thursday," she said. "I arranged a car for tomorrow morning," he said. "If you're ready." "I'll be ready." He stood. He looked at his mother one final time, at the 71-year-old face of a woman who had built her life around a definition of loyalty that had, in the end, required her to betray the person her son had chosen to be loyal to. The tragedy of it was not that she had been cruel. The tragedy was that she had been in her own complete and fully committed way trying to protect something she loved, and the protection had required destroying something she refused to love. And she had been wrong about the necessity of that destruction for 5 years without ever allowing herself to fully know it. He left the room. Amara was in the East Wing. He found her where he had found her so many times in the last 5 days. At her drafting table, in the lamplight, pencil in hand. The cultural center plans were spread out in front of her. She looked up when he came in, and what she did before she said anything was look at his face, the full, clear-eyed look that saw accurately and did not adjust what it saw to be more comfortable. Park Sung-jin, he said. He's with Yoon's people. The second key is being processed. The automated protocol is being deactivated. He sat down on the edge of the work table, not at the drafting table, close enough. Choi Byung-soo has the Western Distribution Corridor for 5 years. That's what tonight cost, among other things. She held his gaze. Are your people okay? Yes. All 43. All 43. She breathed out. A slow, full breath. The breath of someone releasing something they've been holding since the moment they heard the warehouse teams were dark, which was a thing she hadn't shown him she was holding, but had been. And the release of it told him more about the last several hours than anything she could have said directly. Sit down, she said. You've been standing since yesterday. He pulled a chair from the corner of the room and sat. Not at the drafting table, facing her, close enough that the lamp caught both of them in the same light. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands for one moment. Just one. The specific private moment of a man who has held everything in public position for 22 consecutive hours and has found, in this room with this woman, the only space where putting it down briefly is possible. Then he took his hands away from his face and looked at her. She was watching him with the expression he had come to understand, over 5 years, and especially over the last 72 hours, as her most real one. Not the composed surface she wore in hostile rooms. Not the careful neutrality she had trained herself into for this house. Just her face, in the lamplight, looking at him with the specific quality of attention that a person gives to something they have decided to remain committed to, even after understanding its full cost. Tell me about the courtyard, he said. She looked at him. The cultural center? The columns, the light, whatever you were working on. She studied him for a moment, deciding whether this was deflection, whether he was protecting himself from what came next by filling the space with something easier. Then she decided it wasn't, because she was accurate about him, had always been more accurate about him than he'd been about himself. And what she saw was a man who needed to hear about something being built before he could talk about everything that had been destroyed. She turned the drafting plan toward him. The relationship between the columns and the light source is the whole problem, she said. If I get the column spacing wrong by even half a meter, the light hits the interior wall at the wrong angle. Not wrong by a lot. Wrong by enough that the people walking in won't feel what I want them to feel. What do you want them to feel? That they've arrived somewhere, she said. Not that they've entered a building, that they've arrived somewhere worth arriving at. She traced the column line with her finger. It's not dramatic. It's just the right light, at the right angle, at the right time of day. That's it. That's the whole thing I'm trying to build. He looked at the drawing, at the precise, careful relationship between structure and space that she had been working on for months, through everything, through the insults and the exclusions and the forged documents and the 5 days of sustained cruelty and the night in the dining hall and the warehouse and all of it. She had been coming back to this table and working on the relationship between these columns and this light with the same steady, grounded commitment that she brought to every real thing in her life. You know what I was thinking about, he said, when I was standing in the surveillance corridor the first night. What? The Han River, he said. Last autumn. You picked up those stones. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. The surprise of a memory arriving from an unexpected direction. The specific quality of being known in a small, exact detail. You said they had a good weight, he said. She looked at the drafting table. They're still holding down the corners of the elevation drawings. He looked. They were. 4 stones from a walk along the Han River, placed at the corners of the architectural plans she'd been working on for months, holding the paper flat with their specific and unremarkable weight. He looked at those stones for a moment, at the simple fact of them, that she had picked them up on a walk and brought them home and found a use for them, the way she found a use for everything, the way she had found a use for 5 years in a house that did not want her by building her work and holding herself together and waiting for something to be true that she had not yet been given proof was true. "I need to ask you something," he said. She waited. "The night they called you to the dining hall, when you read the document." He held her gaze. "When you picked up the ring and felt the weight was wrong, what were you going to do if you hadn't caught it? If the ring had been right and the signature had held?" She was quiet for a moment. A real moment, not a managed one. The pause of a person going back into a specific memory and finding it accurately instead of comfortably. "I was going to sign it," she said. He said nothing. "Not because I believed it completely. I didn't. Some part of me was already looking for what was wrong, but the 5 days before it." She paused. "They wore something down. Not my knowledge of what was real. My ability to trust what I knew." She looked at him directly. "That's what sustained cruelty does. It doesn't make you wrong. It makes you doubt that you're right. And in that room, with your mother standing there and your cousin standing up and the document in front of me, I was close. I was genuinely close to the edge of what I could trust about myself." The room held that. "I need you to hear that," she said, "not as an accusation, as information, because the part of what happened in this house that came from Kyung-tae and your mother and Choi Byung-soo, that part is visible. It's documented. It's going external, and it will have consequences. But the part that came from 5 years of being made to feel like I didn't belong here," she held his gaze, "that part is invisible. It doesn't show up in financial records. It doesn't appear in the evidence packages. And it did just as much damage." "I know," he said. "I need you to know it differently than you know it right now," she said. "Right now you know it the way you know everything, as a problem that has been identified and will be managed. I need you to know it the way I know it, which is that it happened to me, inside me. And some of it is still happening, and management is not the same thing as repair." He looked at her for a long time. "Then tell me what repair looks like," he said. "Not as a performance, not as a project. Tell me what it actually looks like from where you're sitting." She thought about it. Actually thought about it, the way she thought about structural problems. Not reaching for the answer that was available, but finding the answer that was true. "It looks like you asking that question," she said finally, "and meaning it. And asking it again in 6 months when I'm not in crisis, and the answer is harder to give because the crisis has passed and the patterns are back, and it would be easy to stop asking." She looked at her hands. "It looks like you seeing me in ordinary rooms, not just in burning ones." "I can do that," he said. "I know you can," she said. "I also know you haven't done it consistently. And the difference between what you can do and what you do is where 5 years happened." He absorbed that. He let it land the full way. Not the managed version, not the version that moved immediately to resolution and action, but the full weight of it, in this chair, in this room, at 2:30 in the morning after the longest night of his life. He let it be what it was. "The Western Corridor," she said after a while, her voice quieter now. "Was there another option?" "No." "You gave up something significant." "Yes." "And Park Sung-jin, 3 years inside your organization." "Yes." She looked at him. "How bad is the damage?" "Significant. Months of recovery work on the financial infrastructure. The external legal processes for Kyung-tae and the law firm in Han will take time. The Choi documentation, what we can bring external and what we can't, that's going to require careful management." He paused. "It's not catastrophic, but it's real. Can you rebuild?" "Yes," he said. No hesitation in it. The flat, certain delivery of a man who has lost things before and has a clear-eyed relationship with what loss actually costs and what it doesn't. "Then you'll rebuild," she said. The weeks that followed did not arrange themselves into a clean progression. Recovery never did. The external documentation packages moved through legal channels at the pace that legal channels moved, which was slower than Joon-Ho would have preferred and faster than Kyung-tae's lawyers had anticipated. The financial embezzlement case was the cleanest. The forensic trail was comprehensive. The forged documentation had been built with enough sophistication to impress investigators and enough traceable error to eventually convict. The law firm executives who had given the forgery technical assistance were the first to cooperate, with the urgency of people who understood that the window for favorable consideration was narrow and closing. Kyung-tae's formal statement, when it was filed, contained the line that Yoon had written down verbatim in the dining hall. "Tell him I'm sorry about the documentation, not the money. The documentation." She didn't deserve to have her name used that way. The statement was a legal document. The line was not legally significant. Joon-Ho read it 3 times anyway. Park Sung-jin's cooperation with Yoon's analysts took 11 days. The secondary financial architecture that he and Choi had embedded in the Baek organization's systems was more intricate than even the worst estimates from the underground operations room had suggested. 6 years of patient construction, layered inside legitimate infrastructure, designed to be invisible until activated and nearly as invisible during activation. It took Yoon's people 6 weeks after Park's debrief to be certain they had found everything. During those 6 weeks, Joon-Ho slept 4 hours a night on average and drank too much coffee and sat in his office going through financial records until the numbers stopped being numbers and started being the specific shape of what patience and access and someone else's certainty that he wasn't looking could build inside a house you trusted. He never stopped looking at it all the way through. The Choi Byung-soo thread was what it was. The 3 individuals in 3 cities pursued it through channels that law enforcement couldn't access, with the thoroughness that Yoon's preparation had made possible. What came back over the following weeks was comprehensive enough to establish the full scope of what Choi had built over 6 years, and damaging enough to his remaining operational capacity that the 5-year territorial arrangement began to look, in retrospect, less like a concession and more like a transaction with a party whose position had been significantly weakened by the exposure. It was not a win, but it was not the catastrophe the 48-hour clock had been designed to produce. Madam Sun-hee left on a Thursday morning as arranged. Joon-Ho walked her to the car. He took the family ring from her hand, gently, and she let him, her hand small and very still. They stood at the gate for a moment in the early morning light, the estate grounds quiet behind them, and he looked at his mother's face and found in it, for the first time in months, something he recognized that was not performance. She looked tired. Old in the way that people look old when they stop managing the presentation of age. And underneath the tiredness, something that might have been, if he was reading it correctly, relief. The specific relief of a woman who has been maintaining a position for a very long time and has finally been relieved of it, however painfully, however not on her own terms. "You taught me that loyalty is sacred," he said. She looked at him. Her eyes were dry, as they had been through all of it. "I still believe that." "I know you do." "I was wrong about what it required." She looked at the ring in his hand. "I was not wrong about what it was." "No," he said. "You weren't." She got into the car. He watched it move through the gate and down the private road and out of sight. He stood there for a minute after it was gone, holding the ring in his hand in the morning air, and then he walked back inside. Soo-jin's message to Amara came in the 3rd week. Amara read it twice at her drafting table and didn't respond immediately. She kept it in her phone for 4 days before she wrote back. Not a forgiveness, not a restoration, something more honest than either. "I know you didn't see it completely. I also know you chose not to look too closely. Those aren't the same thing, but they're closer than you'd like. I'll be okay." She sent it and put her phone down and went back to work. She did not hear from Soo-jin again for several months. When she did, the message was different in quality. Less self-protective, less crafted, more like something said by a person who had spent time alone with themselves and had found the experience instructive. Amara responded to that one the same day. The Cultural Center opened 14 months after the night in the dining hall. The east-facing entrance was exactly as Amara had drawn it. The morning light came through and hit the interior courtyard wall at exactly the angle she had fought for. Through 3 weeks of client negotiation and 6 months of structural revision and 14 months of everything that had happened in between. Anyone standing in the entrance at the right time of morning saw it. The light and the wall and the specific quality of arrival that she had been trying to build since before any of it had happened, back when she was sitting at her drafting table in the Bake Estate's East Wing, trying to remember that she existed before any of this, that she had a mind of her own, that the work was real even when everything else was noise. The building won an architectural award the following year. Amara read the citation at her drafting table in the East Wing. The same table, the same window, the same 4 stones from the Han River holding down the corners of the next project's elevation drawings. The citation described the entrance as a space designed to make people feel, the moment they arrived, that they had come to the right place. She set it down. She thought about what it had cost, the years of it, the specific texture of what 5 years in a house that didn't want her had done to the inside of her, the places that had been worn thin and the places that had held, and the particular question of which was which, that she was still, quietly, still answering. She thought about the night in the dining hall and the replica ring, and the wrong weight of it in her hand, and the moment she had held it and felt the wrongness and had chosen to say what she knew instead of what the room was pressuring her to accept. She thought about Joon-Ho stepping through the panel in the wall and the sound of his footsteps on the hardwood and the way her body had known who it was before her mind had caught up. She picked up her pencil. Outside in the corridor, she could hear Joon-Ho on a call, his voice low, Korean, managing something she didn't need to understand in detail. He would be done in an hour. He had said an hour. He had been right about such things more often lately than he used to be. Not because the world had become simpler, but because he was paying attention to smaller things than he used to, and small things paid attention to consistently turned out to hold more of what mattered than the large ones. She went back to work. The pencil moved. The light came through the east wing window and fell across the drafting table the way light fell across the courtyard wall in the building she had built, without announcement, without drama, doing what it did because it was what it did, illuminating the thing in front of it with the specific generosity of something that doesn't know how to withhold. She kept the 4 stones on the corners of the paper. She kept the ring on her finger. She kept doing the work. That was the whole of it. Not the reckoning in the dining hall, not the warehouse and the negotiation and the territorial concession and the 6 years of Choi Byung-soo's invisible architecture finally made visible. Not even the moment Joon-Ho had stood in front of her in the corridor and said the true thing instead of the easy one. Those were the events. The shape of the events. The thing itself was quieter and more durable than any of them. The decision, made in a specific moment, to know what you know and hold what is real, and to keep holding it, through the forged signatures and the wrong-weighted rings and the rooms arranged against you, until the holding itself became the proof that what you were holding was worth the cost. She had held. It had held her back. In the east wing of the house that had tried to remove her, with the morning light doing its ordinary and unremarkable work on the paper in front of her, Amara Ellis Beck picked up her pencil and drew a line, clean, certain, exactly where she meant it to be.